Welcome, everyone, and good Thursday evening to you. How are you? It is good to see you. It is good to be seen by you. And the one who is happy to do the seeing is, of course, me, Bill Sylvie, a.k.a. The Dungeon Delver. I hope you're all doing wonderful this evening. I'm doing about as good as can be. So I hope you're all just equally as fantastic. We have a good show for you tonight. PAUL Stormberg's going to be in the house. If you don't know who PAUL Stormberg is, well, stick around, because when he pops in, you're going to get a college-level course in D&D history. Anyway, of course, I am glad to see you all. I have seen we've got quite a few more registrations for the Great Underground Online Gaming Convention. That's the GWOC. And if you're not familiar with the GWOC, if you don't know what the GWOC is, well, let's GWOC around the clock. The Great Underground Online Gaming Convention is a little something we do round these parts to celebrate tabletop gaming. And I'm going to share a URL with you real quick here, where you can go and you can sign up. You can play games. You can run games. Now, apparently, for those of you who did not know, there you go. For those of you who were unaware, it is a feature and not a bug that requires me to manually set you as a game master. So if you're out there and you've been thinking, well, it must be something I'm doing, that is you, not me, and unable to create your games and so forth and etc. No, it's all on me. So if you wish to be a game master, you can drop me a message via the GWOC Discord, or you can drop me a message on the regular Discord. You can shoot me an email. Of course, our contact email is bsylvie@gmail.com. And I will go in and I will troubleshoot your entry and make sure that you are set as a game master. But don't feel any pressure if all you want to do is play. So, must I go through Warhorn or just directly sign up through Discord? No, you have to go through Warhorn, Drone Swarm. Just please, do that. It's a little easier on the game masters, so they can get to grips with how many people that they're going to have at their table. So that's the Great Underground Online Gaming Convention, and you should all be there. Now, of course, I would be remiss in pointing out that tonight's video is brought to you by our friends at Hellebarde Games. Hellebarde makes the kind of adventures that they'd like to play. Whether it's for Castles and Crusades, 5th edition, or the OSR, old school is in play at the table with Hellebarde Games. And right now, guess what? They have a sale going on all their in-print 5th edition compatible modules. That is a vast and dismal swamp full of lizard men, a desert caravan trail full of adventures. You will find something that you're looking for to fill that niche in your campaign, or maybe launch an entirely new one. So use the discount code 5EOOP at checkout on their website on the print. That's the print copies of their 5th edition modules to receive 50% off. That's a darn good deal, and we absolutely appreciate our friends over there. Now, if you're new to the channel, if you've just subscribed, and we get these surges of subscribers whenever we hit on topics that are interesting and kind of involving a large scope, we get a lot of folks will sign up, and their first contact beyond watching a few short videos, news videos as I call them during the day, is to is to hit this first live stream. So let me tell you a little bit what we're about and the significance of this regarding tonight's guest. My main focus, believe it or not, is classic Dungeons and Dragons. It's original D&D. It's Maniform basic Dungeons and Dragons, and of course, first edition advanced Dungeons and Dragons. And I feel that to embrace those games and play those games, it behooves one to understand the history of those games, because they come not just at the dawn of Dungeons and Dragons, but the dawn of role-playing games themselves. Just wrap your head around that for a second. Prior to 1974, they don't exist. You go into a hobby shop in December of 1973. What do you guys got in role-playing games? They're going to look at you like you're some kind of egghead. Maybe send you to the local university to talk to the psychology department, because that's a role-playing game, talking to the horn-rimmed glasses set down there. No. Our hobby began, and I enjoy playing the games of the roots of our hobby. But to understand the past, you need people who can have a laser-like focus on that history. You might think that in the grand scheme of things, 50 years is not that long, and surely as history is generally measured, it's not. But 50 years is definitely enough time for details to become muddied, forgotten, changed, and etc. And so it requires a very keen mind to keep those details in sharp focus. And that brings us to tonight's guest, one of the keenest minds in this area of thinking. I am fortunate enough to call him a friend. He is a scholar of this hobby without peer, in my opinion. Ladies and gentlemen, please welcome back to the show, Mr. Paul Stormberg. Paul, good evening to you. It's wonderful to see you. How are you?
I'm great, Bill. Great to see you.
Good.
I see the Dungeon Delver's Cave has improved vastly since the last time I've seen you.
Well, I turned the camera around and put up some new bookshelves. So if that is an improvement, then I accept the compliment, sir.
Looks good to me.
The books are no longer stacked on the table and organized in storage totes. I have the large majority of them behind me here. So it's funny. You and I saw a lot of each other at GaryCon, but how was your GaryCon? You seemed to be busy and having fun.
Seemed to be busy. I believe the term is busier than a one-legged man in a butt-kicking contest.
Yes.
And I was very, very busy. It was a great convention. We had, I don't know if it's the largest old-school role-playing game tournament in the world, but I'd like to think of it as the largest role-playing game tournament in the world. We had a first edition AD&D tournament with 142 people signed up for it.
Wow.
So we had basically 15 teams of 9 and 15 judges set up for it. And it is a one-round open tournament to anybody who wants to try playing old school first edition AD&D. And it was a sort of a return to the Temple of Elemental Evil adventure.
Okay.
So it was that was a fantastic tournament. I ran original wood grain OD&D games at 330 Center Street, where Dungeons and Dragons was born.
Mm-hmm.
And I ran 2 groups of 12 there. And so 24 players. That was a great time. Yolanda Frontani, the owner of 330 Center Street, she's always an amazing host and so gracious to let us play every year at her house. I ran some games. I ran Siege of Bodenberg. It was a great game.
Mm-hmm.
the origins of Gary's interest in elastomers and ultimately fostering his desire to create chainmail. And then I played Battle of the Moat House, another chainmail game, which takes place years before when the Moat House was laid low by the forces out of Hamlet and the Viscounty of Verbank.
Mm-hmm.
And then there was some sand table chainmail games to be had, and I got to see a lot of old great friends of Gary's who are now my old great friends.
Wonderful.
Dave Wesley, Mike Reese, who co-created Tractics with Gary. Dave Wesley, who created Brownstein, which is, the first step into role-playing games.
Mm-hmm.
Mike Menard, the Grognard himself, running Jeff Perrin's Cavaliers and Roundheads, TSR's first published set of rules prior to Dungeons and Dragons.
Mm-hmm.
And who else was there? There's just a lot of great folks there. I had Kevin Hendricks, who used to be a designer for TSR, who is also the designer for the mini game, TSR's mini game, Remember the Alamo. He ran sort of an Alamo Dawn of the Dead mix, where Santa Anna regenerated his army that was defeated recently and reinforced them with zombies using ancient voodoo magic, and brought a whole horde of undead against Davy Crockett and the boys at the Alamo. That was a lot of fun. I believe Vince Vaughn played in that game, as well as Tom Morello. They both played in that game and had a great time. It was run by, and there was another game, a Boot Hill game run by Alan Hammock, which I think they played mainly in that game. But anyways, there was a lot of great stuff going on. Legends of Wargaming was packed this year. It was elbow to elbow war gamers playing anything from Little Wars to Russian campaign Tractics battles using Rocco mini tanks on a sand table. So it was great.
I looked in the Legends of Wargaming room. Now, I met Jeff Perrin and David Weasley both just in passing, though. Obviously, just a hello, how are you kind of moment. But there was one game being played on the sand tables, and I'm not sure who was running it, but I believe they were using either a mashup of chainmail and Tractics or just Tractics, but it was there were like elements of Boot Hill, Stargate, the TV show, Dungeons and Dragons. Basically, it was a bunch of Stargates had opened up, and you had all these disparate forces fighting each other.
So that game is called Interplanar Melee.
Okay.
And it was started back in the 80s among the developers and designers, the young Turks of TSR's designers and developers. One of them being Zeb Cook. And so Zeb Cook has carried on the tradition of those interplanar games. And the rules of interplanar are you can field any army you want, no matter what. But if it comes from a certain set of rules, those rules apply to your figures and anybody that you face. So if you're using Tractics, then you use the Tractics rules. If you're using Boot Hill, you use the Boot Hill rules. And one of the famous stories, I believe, was Tom Moldvay, designer of the 1980 basic set. Tom Moldvay was fielding some cowboys from the Boot Hill setting. And another player was running chainmail, and they had a wizard on the table, or perhaps it was D&D, and they had a wizard on the table. And eventually, one of the Boot Hill cowboys ended up sidling up alongside the wizard and shot him point blank range. Well, they have hit locations in Boot Hill, and so they rolled on the hit location, and it was a headshot, and the wizard was killed instantly. To which the wizard player said, "Oh, wait a second. I have 48 hit points. I'm not dead." And they said, "Sorry, he's using the Boot Hill rules, you are killed instantly. So it is a very zany, sort of crazy, multiverse, multi-rule set battle that goes on. And that's usually run by Zeb Cook every year, one of the original players of the Interplanar Melee, which used to go on amongst the TSR employees back in the day.
Then that must be Zeb that I was talking to. I got a few pictures of it. I didn't want to make a nuisance of myself, like, oh, what's that? What's that? You know, that sort of thing.
You didn't fanboy on Zeb? That's nice.
I did not fanboy on Zeb. I tried not to fanboy on anyone because, I mean, hey, you know, they're there to game too. They're
yeah, Zeb. You know, Zeb runs that game, and he loves that game. And I think people are pleasantly surprised when they get into the game that it's so zany and fun. But yeah, Zeb does a great job with that game. Carries on a great. And you know, he received a Lifetime Achievement Award from Gary Con this year as well. So
excellent.
It's a really nice honor for him. I mean, Zeb is so prolific. I mean,
yeah.
If you go and look at what he has written, it's astounding. You know, I mean, second edition, sure, but there's a number of games he created. Like, I think he created the All My Children game for TSR. They said, hey, we need a game based on a soap opera. And Zeb was like, I can do that. And he just did it. And that's the caliber of game designer is, you know, you could hand him literally a clay and say, make a game out of it. And he would make a game out of it. And, you know, he started Planescape. I mean, it's just Oriental Adventures. His credits in the D&D world are just astounding. And not even that. I mean, he created the amazing engine, the amazing game system engine, and I mean, just all the stuff that he's created is absolutely fantastic. And then he went on to work for Blizzard Games or Bethesda or somebody to create video games for them. He's just had an incredible career.
Wow, that's I wish I'd had the free time. I mean, this Gary Con this year was kind of a surprise to me. So it's like it was literally 11th hour. I was able to beg my way into an AD&D game that Alan Grohe was running, and I ran some OD&D. I just grabbed an empty table and sat down and said, "We're playing OD&D," and had a few people playing that. And then somebody came and grabbed me after that, before Alan's game, to play in their DCC game. And I have no idea who that was or who anyone else at the table was. But also, I was over at Heidi's house on Sunday afternoon. I went over to...
I think I saw some pictures of that.
Yeah, that was a lot of fun. But yeah, so it was kind of sprung on me as a surprise, but I'm glad I got to go, and I'm glad I got to see you and deliver your mushroom men by hand.
Yeah, and you know, when Bill 3D printed a model of one of the Myconids, which is based on a drawing by Erodus, and somebody had made a 3D model, and Bill printed me a beautiful copy of one. He printed me two, one for me, but the other one I had intended to give to Errol Otis. And basically, I ran into him once during the whole show, and I didn't have it on me. So I went to the very helpful Gary Con staff and said, do you know where Errol Otis is on Sunday morning? And they said, his flight leaves at this time. So if you go to the front lobby, you'll probably see him. So I went to the front lobby and just waited there for 30 minutes. And then I decided I was going to go down the hall and see if I could see him talking to somebody. And we ran into each other magically. I handed it to him, and he just thought it was fantastic. He loved it. And he put it right in his bag and was very appreciative. I mentioned your name, and he said that, oh yeah, Bill Sylvie. Yeah, that's great. Thanks, Bill. I really appreciate it. So.
Well, we're going to have Errol on the show on the 18th of May. He will be here.
You'll have to ask him how he liked that, because It went over
I
pretty
will.
well.
I will. There's a few, and like, I don't know if it's just the ledger domain of someone who knows how to work CAD software, if they're doing some kind of trickery with photo stereolithography or what. But there's actually 2 or 3 Errol Otis pieces out there available to print. So, and one of them is the entire cover of the basic D&D box set.
Wow. Yeah, I've seen that one. I've also seen one that is the Drow Captain, which was I think a figure designed by I think it was designed by Kevin Hendricks, who's that designer I mentioned, the designer of Remember the Alamo and editor and developer of a couple other games like Dungeon. And then Kevin Hendricks. He said, Errol, this is what I want him to look like. And then Errol did the drawing. And then they made one for Grenadier. Grenadier made that figure. I believe it was Grenadier. And then recently, I think Otherworld Miniatures took an image of that art that was found in an art collection somewhere and reproduced it in 3 dimensions again. So
yeah. Otherworld has a really great catalog of old school looking minis. I have it's next to impossible to see. I think it's completely out of shot, but you can see it in the opening credits. I have their Dave Trampier demon idol piece all painted up and everything, and that's a lovely piece. They do some good work. They're at Otherworld. I'd like someone to do a proper Ifrit, but who knows?
Well, have you seen the sort of action figure versions of it? There's a new set of action figure versions that have like Errol Otis's wizard from the female wizard from the basic set.
Yes,
and I think they might have the fighter, but they also have an Ifrit. I don't know if it's WizKids or who it is, but somebody has one of those.
It is actually a smaller company called Reflections. They do like a very Kenner Star Wars figure era sort of packaging. We've talked about those. Now the one, I guess I don't know who it is, Nico or one of the toy company.
You mean? Let's get my finger. This guy right here, right?
Yeah. They did like a 20-inch statue of him. That's they get a silver star for you tried on that. It's kind of useless on the tabletop, and they took the thief or illusionist or whatever she is out of the Ifrit's hand and put the knight there instead. So I will leave that to questions of individual taste as to whether you think it's an improvement or not. I don't, but we can have that debate another time. But I'd like to see someone do something like the demon idol here that's a little bit more wieldy on the tabletop. But if wishes were fishes.
I think Gary had a saying like that.
Yeah.
But he reversed everything.
Yeah.
I think he said, if wishes were horses, then a man could eat, and if horses were fishes, then no one would ride, or something. He just mixed it all up.
Right. That we've all heard high Gygaxian. This is probably low Gygaxian that, but
when he gets into his puns, it's definitely low Gygaxian.
Oh yeah, I would email Gary a question, like a sincerely serious question, on the mailing list when we were working on Yigsburg, and I'd get an answer back, and he might have a pun there. And that was it. Just like 5 or 6 emails back and forth where we completely lose the plot, just punning back and forth at each other. So now I hope this is something you can discuss, but I ran into you at the parking lot at GaryCon, and you were on a specific errand. Can you talk about that? Or
Yeah, I can talk about that.
Okay.
So
I,
I was
not trying to put
standing.
you on the spot. If you can't, just,
No,
you know.
no, it's fine. So I am president of the Gygax Memorial Fund, which has been trying for years to
Mhm.
establish a memorial, a monument to Gary in Lake Geneva.
Mhm.
But Gary's widow, Gail, has tried very hard for several years and ultimately got permission to build a statue. The first answer she got was, no memorials may ever be built in Lake Geneva, ever. And so she won them over, and eventually they said, okay, you can build a memorial in Lake Geneva. And then they offered her some land, which is on the northeast inlet to the lake. There's the White River leads in up there. In
Okay.
any event, that is a wetland and was unfortunately under 8 feet of water in 2019 and is just not a very suitable spot for the monument. So we've been working with the city we've been trying to, we've been seeking community engagement in our desire to recognize Gary's legacy and how
Mhm.
important he was to the city of Lake Geneva. There's not a lot of appreciation for what Gary did, but just recently in an article in the Chicago Tribune, the president of the board of the museum the Geneva Lake Museum, the local community museum, he said, there's just not anybody who has done as much for Lake Geneva and from Lake Geneva as Gary Gygax. He said, there's a lot of famous names, and his name is Ed Schwinn, and that is the Schwinn of the Schwinn bicycle family. But he mentioned the Schwinns, the Wrigleys, the Wards, all of these families who are very well known and very famous and lived in Lake Geneva, but they only summered in Lake Geneva. Gary made everything in Lake Geneva. He started from dirt poor in Lake Geneva and he founded Gen Con there. He founded TSR there. He created Dungeons and Dragons there. And he wrote his best-selling books, his New York Times best-selling books from there. And he did it all from this little town of Lake Geneva. So we've been working on a series of initiatives. That's what we call them, a series of initiatives to sort of educate the city on the importance of Gary and show that we're committed to giving things to the city and providing opportunities for the city to benefit from Gary's legacy. So we established a permanent exhibit, the Gygax Memorial Fund, in cooperation with the Geneva Lake Museum. We established the Wizard of Lake Geneva exhibit at the museum there. And there are some pictures on our website of the Gygax Memorial Fund, which is a nonprofit organization. And you can see that there are 2 stained glass windows that were created by Jeff Easley, which are incredible. I mean, I had seen Jeff's original artwork, and I was like, well, I suppose they'll look okay. But then when they actually turned out in stained glass, they were just absolutely phenomenal. We've been working on a timeline and getting donations. Daniel Fisher of Hammered Games, the game table company, donated a massive table to them. It's just a gorgeous table. And Gygax donated stained glass that used to hang in the original Dungeon Hobby Shop. And the museum had a stained glass professional fix that up and then backlight it and mount it on the wall. Looks incredible. And so when the museum is done, it's going to have a timeline describing Gary's relationship to Lake Geneva and his history when he created Dungeons and Dragons and created Gen Con and founded TSR and became a best-selling novelist there in Lake Geneva. And he did it all in that area of the town. So that's one of our initiatives. Another initiative is a walking tour map where you can see how connected Gary is to the entire city. And it's done sort of dungeon style, and you just look, and there's 30, 40 entries just in an 8 block by 8 block area, where he had businesses, where he started Gen Con, where he expanded Gen Con, where he wrote D&D, where and where edition of D&D was printed. All of these things, it's all in this little area of Lake Geneva. So that's another initiative. And then the initiative which you're talking about was there's a park in Lake Geneva, and it's called Elm Park. It's along the North Shore. It's west of the library, where Gary used to go and research for Dungeons and Dragons, for war games. It's where he would check out books to read science fiction and fantasy. And then he would go out into the park, and he would hang out in the park, and he would read in the park at the far west end of the park, and look across the lake, and you can see Stone Manor, his home in 1985 later. And as a boy, he would look out across at Stone Manor, reading Jack Vance and Robert E. Howard and Michael Moorcock and Lord Dunasay, and just dream, about being, a fantasy novelist, or a best-selling fantasy novelist even, and living in Stone Manor and living this life of, his dreams. And so that's actually what happened. That boy who sat there in that park ended up being the Gary Gygax who wrote Dungeons and Dragons and then became a best-selling novelist living in Stone Manor overlooking the lake. And so that dream really came true for him. And that's why at the far west end of the park is a little patch of grass, which is about 75 foot by 75 foot. And we had tried to get the bench right there where Gary may have sat looking across the lake, dreaming about becoming a best-selling fantasy novelist. And we saw that there was a bench there in disrepair and pretty shabby. And so we offered to the city of Lake Geneva that we install a new bench, buy a new bench, and dedicate it to Gary's memory. So the Gygax Memorial Fund, while I was standing next to the dumpster at the Grand Geneva, unloading my van, getting ready for GaryCon, as I was standing there, my phone rang and it said Public Works Department. And I had sent in the request 2 or 3 months before. And so I was like, is calling me from the Public Works Department. Well, they were there to tell me, and probably in a bit of irony that Gary thought was funny, that indeed we had gotten permission to get the bench. So
Excellent.
That very day, when I ran into you, and I ran into you in the parking lot at the Grand Geneva at GaryCon, I was on my way to deliver a check from the Gygax Memorial Fund to buy that bench and to get the plaque made and dedicated to Gary. Our intent is to have that installed on Gary's birthday on July 27th. And that will be the dedication ceremony. Now, what we would really like is to then get that whole section of the park, this little tiny park at the far west end part of the park, and have that named Gygax Park, and have that be the location, the memorial. And the memorial, as I know you know, but I'll explain to the viewers, the memorial is basically a stone table with Gary sitting at one end of it in bronze on a throne. And then there will be a 4 foot by 8 foot bronze low relief map of the first level of Gary's playtest castle, his original castle. And
wow.
There will be 2 benches along either side, and there'll be a sidewalk that comes up to the end of the table opposite of Gary, and that will be wheelchair or handicap accessible.
Good.
And so
Good.
Gary will be in mid storytelling. His pose will be mid storytelling, and he will have his hand extended down pointing to the map, so that a DM could run a game on that map on the first level of Gary's castle with miniatures, a 1-inch grid scale for each miniature, and that you could, and we will upload his original key to our website, So you can play the first level of his that he originally demonstrated or that he originally used to first play Dungeons and Dragons with Ernie and Elisa at his dining room table at 330 Center Street. And so players will be able to gather around Gary. The game master or dungeon master will be able to sit right next to him and even roll his dice off of Gary's hand onto the table. So it will be like Gary will be incorporated into their game. And so we expect people to come to this table and be able to play D&D right on the table with Gary. And there's parking right there along Main Street. And located right on the corner of that is a big public restroom made of brick, which is a really nice facility. And that means that people will be able to come there, sit under the shade of the blossoming trees that grow nearby, look out across the lake, and play D&D with Gary right where Gary sat and dreamed and looked across the lake and thought about becoming a best-selling fantasy novelist.
Well, that sounds absolutely phenomenal, man. I hope I can get up there one day when it's warm to do that. It's I mean, a foot of snow at Gary Con. That was the day we stopped driving. We were like, we're not going to terrorize these poor people.
Wait a second. We're Florida. We're not supposed to be driving in this stuff.
Exactly. But yeah, I would love to see that in full bloom, man. I am excited about that. The URL is up on the screen there if anybody wants to check out the Gygax Memorial Fund. And thank you for that update, because I know, you know how reasonable people are when they're on the internet, of course. And
it has really been a big struggle for Gail, because she was pretty much doing it by herself. The first thing the town said to her was no memorial ever. And that was her starting point. And then they said, well, we'll give you a memorial, but we have to create a policy for it first, because we don't have any policy for memorials. And then it was just one slow step after the other. And so there have been a lot of starts and stops, and the original design wasn't great, but I think that Lake Geneva is, with all of these initiatives that we've been working on, I think they're really starting to come around to realize that Gary gave a lot to them and has a great legacy. There are millions of fans who want to connect with that legacy, and they have nothing to connect to in Lake Geneva. Once we put these things in place, they will literally be able to sit with Gary and play D&D. And they will, furthermore, they will stay overnight. With the walking tour map and the Wizard of Lake Geneva exhibit, and the memorial itself, that's enough activities to sort of tip the scale and get people to say, let's go for the weekend, or let's get there on Thursday morning. We'll go get lunch. We'll go to the museum. We'll stay overnight. The next morning, we'll go play the game on the table. Then we'll have lunch, and in the afternoon, we'll do the walking tour, and we'll drive home, or maybe even stay another night and go see something else in the town. So the idea is to get people who want to connect with Lake Geneva, have enough there to make it the purpose of them going there. And that's our hope. So one thing I didn't tell you about, which I think you will think is pretty cool.
Well, hit me.
We have been working with the Lake Geneva Public Library, where Gary, of course, did his research, and he actually held wargaming events there and ran chainmail there and other war games at the library. And we decided that we would put an Appendix N collection in the library.
Oh, that's wonderful.
So we were able to narrow appendix down to about 112 books and compendiums and just single novelettes, that sort of thing. And so we were able to narrow down the whole Appendix N list to about 112 books. And the Gygax Memorial Fund is donating those books to the museum, and they gave us a beautiful little bookshelf just for those books. And they'll all have a little book plate which will say Gary Gygax's Appendix N.
That's great, dude. That is fantastic.
And next to the bookshelf, we found this huge, ridiculous mahogany throne with a kind of buttoned down sort of leather padded seat and back, and a sort of crown motif on it, huge carved lion heads for the handles and claw feet. And we're going to put that in there, and it's going to have a plaque on it that says Throne of Reading.
Man, I love this. This is phenomenal. You got a Chesterfield throne, appendix, and what more could anyone want? Nothing. I'm just going to jump ahead. Nothing. That is delightful, man. That is great. You know, for a thing that's been in limbo for a long while, this definitely sounds like something that is worth the wait. I mean, you know, the first couple of times I ever went to Lake Geneva was for the LGGC back at the turn of the century. I can't believe I say that. And it's like, man, if you weren't there, because those were more in the summer, right? You know, late
June. Right, June.
No snow on the ground, but yeah, if you weren't there to go to the lake or play golf or ride horses, like it just seemed like the town just didn't give a damn. You know, I mean,
well, you know, with a lot of famous people who live there, the Wrigleys and the Schwinns and the Wards, you know, there were some very famous families that lived there. And so, but then there's a whole body of people who come there from Chicago, and it's their second home. They're just there for the summer. But then there's a whole group of people in the town itself who, a lot of them were employees of TSR. I mean, the town's only several thousand, and at one point, I think it's 6,000 or something like that, but at one point, TSR employed 400 people there. You know, so you know somebody who worked for TSR. If you lived in Lake Geneva in the 80s, you know somebody who worked for TSR. Your aunt, your uncle, your cousin, your sister, your brother, you, whatever it is. So there are people who know about it, but they're not necessarily the people who influence how things happen in Lake Geneva, if you know what I mean.
Yes, so, yes, I know what you mean. This was something I had pointed out to Colleen. I think it was our first or second trip to Lake Geneva. Again, back at the LGGC, I was sitting in traffic. You know, we're getting a bite to eat or something, and you know, sitting there at 50 Main, you know, waiting to take a left or right. I don't remember which, but the two cars in front of me and the car that was making the turn all had like Florida license plates on them. I was like, there's more people from Florida counting us right here in this little tiny chunk of Lake Geneva than there are Lake Genevans. But it's good to know. It's good to know that things are moving forward.
That's the sort of struggle that Gail was kind of up against, is you have a lot of people who vacation there and want it to be this quaint little lake town. But then they're the people who actually have businesses there and have to have a job and pay rent and live there. And they need the tourist economy to survive. And so it's the struggle between trying to meet this sort of unrealistic expectation that it's a quaint little lake town to it is a tourist town. And it has always been a tourist town. And so that struggle between wanting it to be this idyllic sort of one thing, and then it having to be another thing for people to live there and work there and have businesses there and thrive. It's another thing. So that struggle has, it has slowed us down a little bit, but we kind of backed out and we've reapproached it by doing this Gygax Memorial Initiative to try to get the town to engage with Gary's legacy. And now we're going to try to kind of come back in and see with this impetus of projects and, support of Gary's legacy that they will come to the realization. I've done modeling, which shows that we can bring in $3.6 million of economic impact to that community year round. And in direct room tax and parking, which is the way the city gets any money. They don't have sales tax or anything else. They get money from parking and they get money from room tax. That is $365,000 straight revenue to the city for having these programs year round. And so that's what the Gygax Initiative is trying to prove to the city, that while Gary gave a lot to the city while he was alive, he can continue to give to their city in the future by all of his fans trying to connect with him and Dungeons and Dragons and his legacy in that little town.
That is, Paul, that is just wonderful. And by the way, I know a lot of you folks have got questions and comments you'd like to get to Paul. I am queuing those up. Fear not. We'll get to those. And just that's fine. So I have two questions, and I hope I'm just going to touch on these as lightly as I can. Is there any involvement from Wizards of the Coast with this?
Well, yes. Wizards of the Coast original sold their premium books, their premium first edition reprint books, as you recall.
Right.
They basically gave the Memorial Fund a nice check, and we had True Dungeon at Gen Con. They took their first day's receipts and donated them. Their first day's receipts, ironically, running the village of Hamlet as their adventure. They took their first day's door receipts for that and also donated it. So we do have several large donors. Gen Con has also had 2 charity auctions in which they have donated money. And of course, individual game donated money, anywhere $5 to $1,000. And so all of that money has always been used directly to hire sculptors to make models, to hire artists to do sketch work, to pay architects to do planned site drawings. But obviously, we had a site that we didn't really like, so we had to move it. And I don't think that the city really liked the original design, which was a turret with Gary kind of leaning over the top of the turret.
Right.
This table idea, which was proposed when I came on board in 2019, if you look in a park and you see a table with a person sitting at a chair, that is really not an eyesore. That's just, part of the park, right? Mm-hmm. And so we believe that this new design, while being perfect for the gaming community to connect with Gary, will also be palatable to that group of people in Lake Geneva who basically don't want a giant dragon statue in the middle of their park when they're looking across the lake. And so, we're trying to achieve a balance between the people who want the bucolic beauty of the lake and the people who need to make a living and run businesses in Lake Geneva.
Well, that sounds like a wonderful balance.
Does that answer your question?
That definitely answers that part of the question. The other one is, and look, let's just make this a yes or no question. Are there any other organizations using the initials TSR that are even remotely involved in this? currently?
No, initially, initially we supported Justin and the museum and TSR. And I donated an elastilin castle and a bunch of elastilins. I helped him research material. I was very enthusiastic about the idea of the Dungeon Hobby Shop.
Okay.
And there was exciting potential there. I mean, it sounded like a great idea, but unfortunately, they went off the rails. And at one point, kind of forced us into we're going to run this thing to ask for donations for our campaign, our financial campaign against Hasbro or Wizards of the Coast. And they did not ask our permission. They said that they were going to do that, and any money that they made, they would donate to us, which was very nice. But obviously, Hasbro is one of our major donors, and we didn't want to have anything to do with that. And so we politely asked them to withdraw that statement, and they did so. And so that was the extent of our relationship with them. There was a great promise and a great hope, and we wanted to work with them, but then they just took some wrong directions, unfortunately, that, for a company like us that is working on having a good PR image after struggling a long time to get this memorial, we afford to be involved with a controversy like that. And so my decision as president of the Memorial Fund was to politely ask them to take that sort of offer down.
Okay.
Well, there's your simple answer.
I wanted to be delicate about it because I know there's a lot of feelings. People have opinions, and I didn't want to.
I am happy to answer any questions you ask.
Good. After you're done with this, are you going to work on something for the Violent Femmes too? Because they're from Lake Geneva. I'm just saying. They deserve it too, man.
I had a Violent Femmes record album pinned to my wall of my dorm room in college. So,
well, there you go. You have your next peak to climb, Paul. We do have some questions in the first, actually. I'm going to throw this one to you. This is from Doomsword, who super chats. Thank you very much for that, Doomsword. We do appreciate the help around here. Can I ask Paul about that flyer thing that we discussed? So I actually have to share this up on the screen for you to see here, Paul. Doomsword is asking about the provenance of, let me see here, present. Share screen. I got to click share screen like 6 times to get it to share. But hopefully you'll be able to see this clearly. And there's a couple of pages. And I'm gonna remove your question there so Paul can see that clearly. He's asking about the provenance of this flyer, and we've got 2 pages. Can you see that, Paul? Do you need me to zoom that?
I can see it. Mm-hmm.
Okay. So yeah. Whoa! Wow, that was more than you wanted.
Hobby shop.
Okay.
At the Dungeon Hobby Shop, Terry Kuntz was the clerk at the hobby shop, and David McGarry was sort of the manager of it, but he was also the treasurer for TSR. But when stock came in, it was mainly Terry Kuntz who handled all of that. Well, Terry came up with this idea in about 1975 of creating a sort of cardstock folder with the company's product line on it. But as they expanded the product line, he started printing these little flyers for each additional product, and those would just slip inside the folder. And so they never had to reprint the folders. They just printed these sheets. And eventually the catalog was this folio of leaflets surrounded by this cardstock image. And so that was Terry Kuntz's design, invention, brilliant marketing ploy. And it worked seamlessly for years. So a lot of these little flyers, just like this, were floating around for years. And that model of the TSR catalog survived well into 1977 until they started having enough money to just print and catalog every time they had new product. But that was the initial 1975 TSR catalog invented. So this piece of paper would have slipped inside that heavier cardstock paper that was the base. If I hadn't put all my collection into banker's boxes to make room for a kitchen remodel I'm doing, I would have pulled it out and showed you.
Oh, well, it's the thought that counts. So there you go.
Short answer.
Another short answer, and that's fine. So thank you very much for your answer, and thank you to Doomsword for the good question. I have a question because I'm host of the show. My question is next, and the rest of you guys I'll get to in order after that. Somebody pinged me on Twitter the other day because they were asking, they're like, well, I'm playing a D&D game and something to the effect of they needed jousting rules. And I was like, here's your jousting rules. And I just posted a picture of the page out of Chainmail, which you taught me to joust. And they were very appreciative. But someone else came in and said that there is an error on one of the grids. And did I know anything about it? That Gary had addressed it in an issue of Dragon. Do you know what this person's talking about and which grid square he means?
Yes. So in the game, if you break a lance, and remember, the original idea of the game was that you would ride at each other, and then you'd be on your opponent's side. And that's where you keep all your lances on your side. So when two knights ride at each other, tilting along the list there, and if you break a lance, then on your way back, you can only do steady seat. Because basically all you can do is hunker down and hope the guy doesn't blast you off of your horse because you don't have a lance. And so you're riding back defenseless, essentially. Now, in movies, you can see occasionally there will be a chivalric, I offer you my lance, sir, which means it allows the knight to use one of the opponent's lances since he's at that end. So that's what Gary was trying to model a game. However, it is sort of like shooting fish in a barrel. It is pretty hard because then your opponent knows you're only going to take one defensive position. And he will just simply pick, he will simply pick the worst possible result for you, and there's no choice. So in addition to, I believe it's lower helm and steady seat are the two. Now, I don't have a copy of Chainmail in front of me right now, but basically it's the fourth and the sixth column. The fourth and the sixth column.
Okay.
And so what that does is it doesn't make you quite shooting a fish in a barrel. Now, that solution was proposed by Timothy Kask, editor of the Dragon magazine. He said, Gary, look at this. Well, every time I ride back, I just get my ass handed to me if I've broken my lance because I just have one choice. And that's the whole magic of the game is between the 6 aiming points and the 6 defensive positions. I'm not sure how many that is, but it's, a couple hundred variations that it could possibly be. And that's the beauty of the game. It's the strategery between you and your opponent. Like when it's a wife and husband, I know with 100% certainty, the wife will aim for helm the first ride. Just, it's an absolute certainty that it happens. And with siblings, I have noted, doesn't matter how old the siblings are, with siblings, they choose the exact same aim points and defensive positions every time. Every ride, it's always exactly the same. And that is sort of the trend that I see in sort of the humanity that comes out of the strategery and decision making. But so that's kind of the history of that flaw in the table.
Okay, well, now we know. And hopefully the person who pinged me on Twitter is watching, and you got that. Otherwise, I'll clip and share that with you. So let's see. Let's get into the questions.
Every answer is 40 minutes.
I don't care. I have as much time as you do. Let's see. Let's see. Oh, Road March asks, can we find pictures of the stained glass online?
Yes. www.gygax Memorial Fund, one word, .org, because we're a nonprofit. There are some beautiful photos up there of the museum on Facebook. You can find them on Facebook at Gygax Memorial Fund as well. But you can just go to, I'd go to Facebook. That would be the best place for it.
Okay.
Because I think that the photos on the website, I don't know if I've loaded those up yet. I should do it. But if you go on Facebook and look up Gygax Memorial Fund, several of these things will be posted, along with the Chicago Tribune interview I just did with a writer named Chris Borelli, talking about all of this Gygax Memorial Fund stuff. But all the pictures of the exhibit are on Facebook on Gygax Memorial Fund, and will soon be uploaded to they'll soon be uploaded to the Gygax Memorial Fund website. The reason nothing has been loaded up is because when I got back from Gary Con, I had a terrible case of COVID. It took me about 3 weeks to get over it. Yeah. And we hugged. So there you go.
Yes.
You're welcome. Yes. You're welcome. Or damn it,
he's felt super spreader.
So, and then right after that, I caught a cold that my daughter had, which was a terrible bronchitis cold that caused her and me both to lose our voices. And so, anyways, I've been sick for a long time, so I really haven't been in the mood to post anything about GaryCon, but those will be going up there pretty soon, and everybody will be seeing. But right now, it's on the Facebook page for Gygax Memorial Fund.
All right, and that link was uploaded earlier, guys. Just you guys in the chat, let me know if you want me to share that URL again, and I'll put it up there. But it's fairly easy to follow. Let's see. This is fairly tongue-in-cheek, but I'm going to put it up there anyway because you got to laugh at something. First, Steel Mongoose says, "I wonder what they'll dedicate to Lorraine Williams." And then John Walker has the helpful suggestion: should the brick bathroom be dedicated to the Blooms?
Well, and now this will be sort of controversial.
Uh-oh.
Brian Bloom was actually a gamer, and he was a game designer.
Yes,
and he ran the Boot Hill campaign, in which Gary played Mr. G at the Rockin' G Ranch. And Gary loved playing in that game. And Don Kay also played in that game. And the three of them played that game together when they were the three partners of TSR. So, Don liked playing D&D, but Don's thing was when he was a young boy, Mary Gygax said he used to like to pose like Hondo, John Wayne character, right? So he liked to pretend he was Hondo when he was a 12-year-old. And so he loved, the Western theme. And so those three men, I kind of thought when Gary died and when Brian died, I thought, I just thought it was nice to think of them. I'm sure Gary was thinking, now I can resume my Boot Hill game with my three friends, because that's what they started as. It may not have ended that way, but at one time in their life, they were three friends, and Brian was a true game designer, and he wasn't just a businessman bastard like he's portrayed to be. And, Gary had opportunities to buy the stock the Blooms were offering, but Gary didn't see Lorraine Williams' true betrayal coming. And so, it ended pretty crummy, but I don't think it was entirely my fault. And I don't think Brian was entirely a bad person. And then Lorraine Williams, as bad as you might think Lorraine Williams is, the company had been going through some really rough times. And I asked every person I interviewed or talked to about the history of this. And I would say, who do you think had the best interests of the company in mind during their tenure? Gary Gygax, Brian Bloom, Kevin Bloom, Lorraine Williams. And when I asked this question, Dave had been with the company since mid-1976, and he had been working as an artist for the company since 1975. He was there very early. And furthermore, he was with the company until they were sold to Wizards of the Coast. So Dave had seen it all. I asked Dave this question, and he said Lorraine Williams. And I was floored. And I said, why? He said, because we all had families and children, and we had to send them to school, and we all needed a job. And she kept the lights turned on, and she kept us all employed without 40 people being fired this day, 30 people being hired the next day, 100 people being let go on one day the next day. Instead, she kept the company going. And she did keep the company going for as long as Gary kept the company going, essentially. So, yes, she did steal the company from Gary. And that was a cruel blow for certain. But she did keep a lot of our beloved game designers like Zeb Cook and Harold Johnson and everybody else who stayed, Jim Ward, and everybody who stayed on the company, and ended up producing a lot of game material that was loved by a lot of people. So despite how bad she was in the Gygax story, the villain she's portrayed, to some of those people, she saved the day in their eyes. So it's a controversial position, but it's one that is a historical position. So,
well, and I think, as I said in my introduction, history tends to get muddied, details tend to get blurred and obscured, and I think we can not like historical facts and things to do with historical people. I mean, was George Patton a nice guy? No, probably not.
Hey, nobody ever called Pablo Picasso an asshole.
He would walk down.
Speaking of our guys, isn't that Violent Femmes? I think that's Violent Femmes, isn't it?
No, that Pablo Picasso is. It's not the Femmes. Pablo Picasso is. I think it's Circle Jerks.
Oh yeah. Well, you can tell my musical taste by being able to quote Pablo Picasso was never called an asshole. So yeah,
that's right. So let's see. More questions though. Here's a question. I'm not sure how far his tongue was buried in his cheek when he said this, but Amerifetti says, if we start a GoFundMe and raise an equal or greater amount of money than Wizards of the Coast has donated, will you ask WotC to withdraw?
Well, Wizards of the Coast made that donation. I mean, gosh sakes, it was in 2012 or 2014. It was a long time ago, before they were even bought by Hasbro. So that's a lot of water under the bridge, and we've spent that money.
Yeah.
So yeah.
Exactly. So, and just to be certain, Amerifetti, if they tell them that they have money, WotC might send Pinkertons after them. I'm just, we don't want Paul to get a visit. Okay. The bad guys from Deadwood, Paul.
Once upon a time, the Pinkerton detectives were heroes in the movies.
Well, that's, yeah. Let's see. Let's see, Chris, thank you. Let's see, Errol Otis on May 18th, putting that date in my phone, and I will be fanboying over. Yeah, well, thank you. It'll be awesome to have him on. John Walker asks, he's been waiting in the wings. I think John may have gotten the first question off here. I just don't get them in a good order in my queue. How did you come to meet all the developers at TSR from back in the day? You're sort of young.
Yes, actually, I was sitting at a TSR reunion chatting with some folks, and I believe it was Jeff Leeson who turned to me and said, "Paul, when exactly did you work at TSR? I don't remember you." Because I was telling stories as if I had been there, because I had heard all of these stories. And I said, well, I was actually 12 when when you were at TSR, so that's why you didn't know me. No, the reason I know is because I run an online auction house called the Collector's Trove. And 1.5 million years ago, I bought, let's see if you can see it. Let's see, is it this way? I bought the Paladin in Hell piece of artwork directly from Daveland, along with later the Dungeon Master's Guide painting. And as Dave Sutherland and I talked, he said, gosh, Paul, you know a lot about this stuff. I'm dying of end-stage liver disease. Would you auction off the rest of my collection? I'd like to leave a trust fund or a nest egg for my daughters after I die. And I said, okay. And so I got his collection and ended up selling it off for tens of thousands of dollars, several tens of thousands of dollars. And then one thing led to another, and I was introduced to Tim Giardini, and then I was introduced to Rob Kuntz, and then I was introduced to Ernie Gygax, and then I was introduced to Steve Marsh, and then Kevin Hendricks, and then Zeb Cook, and then Darlene, and then Jim Rosloff and Laura Rosloff. And one after the other, I got the collections of all of these TSR designers, artists, company insiders, the computer guy who ran the computers, secretaries, whatever. And they sent me their collections of business cards and letters and memos and shrink wrap product and whatever they had. And every time I ran one of these auctions, I tried to tell their story and how their story played into TSR. Like a good Christie's auction, you don't just take one item and auction it. You put it together with a collection of items from that person's life, and you tell a story, and you get people who are interested in collecting ashtrays and who are interested in collecting lamps to both be in the auction and decide, I want that or I want. And that is how I kind of learned the history. And I think it's a pretty unique perception of the history, because while Rob Kuntz or Darlene, they can tell their story from their perspective and what TSR was like to them, I can tell it from Darlene's perspective and Rob Kuntz's perspective and Harold Johnson and Zeb Cook and everybody, right? And so I start getting this really sort of holistic view of what TSR was actually like. And that's how I became friends with a lot of these people is, I think Tim Cahoon, who ran TSR's computers, their mainframe computers, named Rocky and Bullwinkle, the name of their two computers. Tim was sort of the server operator for those and took the discs off every night and backed them up and put new discs on and did that whole sort of thing. I tried to get his collection for years, and then finally he brought me his collection, and it was like he's like, okay, here it is. And then I think I sold his collection for $37,000, a ton of money, right? And he's like, right. Gosh, Paul, if I would have known I thought you were gonna make like $400 or $4,000, but instead you made me $40,000. And he went and bought a new camper, and then his pickup truck wasn't big enough to pull that camper, so he bought a new pickup truck too. And so, nice. It went from them just having some junk in their basement to being their retirement plan. And, you know, all of these guys were making minimum wage at TSR back in the day. And the fact that they saved a box of junk that's worth $10,000, $20,000, $30,000, I mean, that's karma to me. I think beautiful. So they're my friends because they created the alchemy that came out of that company and the magic that came out of that company. I've seen manuscripts which have come out of TSR, and I was like, wow, this is a real piece of junk. How did it end up being this beloved, beautiful game that I love so much with Air Lotus art and calligraphy by Darlene? How did it become this stuff? And that's it. It was just this magical alchemy between all of these people that created magic of our youth, right? And so for me to be able to do this is an absolute pleasure. And for me to become friends with these people is just the treat of my life. So I feel very fortunate. But that's how I know.
There you go. And I have to say, that's a lot more wholesome than my way. I just like chased Gary around the internet till he started messaging me back.
Did that too. We all did that, didn't we? He was like, why didn't somebody ask me about the back armor of Sherman's? They always want to know what Mordenkainen's favorite color was. But Gary wanted to talk about Sherman tanks, not Mordenkainen.
Yes, before. People have asked me. I'm almost certain I've told you this story, and I know the audience has heard it to the point they're probably sick of it. But my favorite Gary story. People are like, "Ooh, what's your favorite Gary story? Did you play D&D with Gary?" I played a few gaming sessions with Gary, and I would make the argument that if you have the Player's Handbook, Dungeon Master's Guide, and Monster Manual at your table, you're gaming with Gary. But that's for another more esoteric discussion. But people say, what's your favorite Gary story? And for me, it's the time that I showed up for Colleen and I showed up for the front porch dinner the last time I saw Gary when he was still with us in 06.
2007. It would have been 2007
it would have been 2007. That's right, 2007. We arrived probably a half an hour early, didn't realize it. But Gary and Gail were very polite and just said, sure, guys, come on up. And we sat there, the four of us, at the table. And Gary and I just got to talking about dad stuff because Colleen was, I think, 3 months pregnant with Rosemary at the time. And Gary and I just talked about dad stuff. We didn't talk about how far an orc can throw an elf, what the armor class of your right foot was if you stepped in green slime with your left foot and it ate your boot. We just talked about dad stuff, about being dads. And
I think that's really important. I mean, I talked some history with Gary, I appreciated, but you know, because these guys, Rob Kuntz and Tim Kask and Zeb Cook and Gary, you know, these guys we're living in this Greyhawk world or this D&D world or even a TSR history, and we're kind of asking them about that stuff. But I felt one of my great failings was to not really talk Gary about other subjects. I mean, I did occasionally, but not nearly as much as I wish I would have while he was alive. So I think that's a great memory. I think that's great. Yeah.
And I try to the little bit. This is the weirdest thing, and I always feel like I have to throw myself on a live grenade. I have a couple of dear friends, and the next time you're down here in Florida, I don't care. Like if you're like, yeah, Bill, we're down in Miami, I will drive to Miami.
I was at Disney World and that drive.
I know it's my fault. It's entirely my fault. But the next time you're down here, we'll make it happen. I'll take you over to Gods and Monsters. But my dear friends who run Gods and Monsters, Todd has gotten it into his head that I worked at TSR at some juncture. I'm like, Todd, I'm not that old, dude. So I've walked in before. There was a guy, he had a stack of like 2E stuff that he wanted to sell the store. And he said, well, here's Bill. He worked for TSR. And I'm like, Todd, come on, man. I did not.
Bill,
I
I
did not slave stomper Gary.
I think that I've seen enough memos and pay stubs and hiring and firing slips, and I think that I could create a sort of false employment record for myself. And and just start distributing it around the internet, and then I'll get invited to conventions for free because I work for TSR.
There you go.
My new shtick.
I actually have a computer question for you. Do you know what happened to those mainframes? In all seriousness, do you know what happened to them?
Well, they originally had a mainframe at the Clare Hotel. Then when they moved to the LR building, the leisure recreational products, which they did custom vans, vans with wizards and the Death Dealer painted on the side. That's what building that TSR moved into. And so that was called the LRP building, and that was kind of 1980 through 82-ish. And then they finally moved into the Torrent building, which is the one you see in pictures from the 90s where TSR's offices were located. And then they had a massive warehouse. They built this 300,000 square. It's just an enormous warehouse that they built just before they imploded, which was beautiful. But anyways, the LRP building, they had then they went up to two mainframes, which was, and they were both HPs. I can't remember the number, HP 1000 or something, HP 1000s. And so those two mainframes, they named Rocky and Bullwinkle, and they were sold to TSR by a guy named Al Buckles. And if you remember the Slavers series, one of the slave lords, lesser slave lords in the slave pits to the Undercity, his name is Buckles. So that's Al Buckles was working for HP, sold them, and then TSR, Kevin Bloom was the real computer egghead, and he was the one who pushed the company into automation or computerization. And so they hired Al Buckles to come and work for the company. And so Tim Cahoon, or Ollie Cahoon as he's called, and Al Buckles were pretty much the computer department at TSR. And then those two mainframes then moved to the new Torrent building. And I am guessing they eventually got replaced and thrown in a dumpster somewhere.
That is a crying shame, because that would be a crossover. If you could lay your hands on that hardware and talk to one of the there's a tiny slice of YouTube that is all about restoring enterprise and industrial level computing from the late 70s, early 80s. That would be a story. Getting one of those things booting again and looking at old TSR records. But I just wondered if perhaps
people have suggested staging an excavation in the Lake Geneva dump to find the B3 Palace of the Silver Princess orange covers that were recalled. So, while you're digging down there, you might as well look for the disc platters from the HP 1000s.
Might as well. Do you have an orange B3?
I do.
Excellent. Wizards had the PDF for free.
There are two in my household right now. And one of them is from the collection of Gary Gygax, and I will be auctioning it in the next month.
Excellent. Not a photocopy of it? Sorry, that's a...
No, not a photocopy. This is genuine article.
Wow.
And it's not a print from Drive-Through Media or whatever either. Now I have to say they're original modules. You didn't have to used to say they're original modules. Now you do.
Yeah.
All right, hit me with another question.
All right, another question. Let's see. Okay, here's a nuts and bolts question. Paul, if it was up to you, would you rename the Barbarian class to Berserker? That comes from Damien.
I would abolish it, because all you need is the fighter.
That's right. And Paladin and Ranger.
That's the purest view of D&D, is that a fighter can be a knight, he can be a wilderness warrior, he can be a city guard, he can be a quarterstaff fighting peasant. He can be whatever you want. And that's why the fighter class is so magical, because you can literally be any sort of fighter archetype. And I don't think that they should have ever made the barbarian. I think they should have kept it. But a lot of people love it, so sure.
I'm with you on that. Let's see. Just a few comments. John Walker says he loves TSR so much because during the shitty high school between being in art and D&D kept me semi-stable. I feel you, John. I absolutely feel you. Let's see. I think this goes back to talking about the honorary statue. And Marifati says, this sounds like something from Ready Player One. I love it. I do too, for the record. Dungeon Minister had a question. He had to step out, but maybe he's back, or he'll catch this on the replay. Dungeon Minister? No, Dungeon Minister is Father Aaron.
Oh.
But anyway, he has anything come of the proposed D&D hotel restaurant attraction in Lake Geneva? Do you know anything about that?
Daniel Colwell has been working very hard on getting funding for it. But this is like a major attraction. Like, he needs a couple $1 million to make this happen. And so he approached the bank, as far as I understand, and they were going to give him a big chunk of it, but then he would have to find an outside investor to get the rest of it. And so that's where he's at. And they pretty much said, you've got to give us a concept and a design. The concept and design work that he did is just amazing. If you've seen some of them online, I think there's a video out there, which is sort of a sizzle reel or trailer for it. Yeah, it's a fantastic guy. Daniel has great vision. He's really talented. He's got a lot of connection to Renaissance Fair people, actors. I mean, everything that he would need to put on that sort of, live action entertainment in a tavern sort of situation. And he's working towards it. But it's a serious endeavor. It needs millions of dollars to come into fruition, and he's still working on it. He's looking for that big outside donor that he needs, or a couple of outside donors. So
right on.
So right on. I completely support that thing. It's the coolest thing ever.
Excellent. Well, and I think this could be a case, if I may offer my 2 cents, I think this could be a case of a rising tide raising all ships. When you guys get the Gygax Memorial and people start to see the draw of all of us graying nerds to Lake Geneva to see something like that, then I think there'll be a more incentive for an organization to back such a thing.
Yeah, and I really want to try to reach out to the new D&D sort of audience and say, if you know what a gelatinous cube is, you know what a mind flayer is, if you love the drow or drow, if you love the drow or drow, I'm a drow guy, because when I was 12, I didn't have anybody tell me it was drow. So I still play with all my buddies from the 80s, and we still all call it drow. So there. Anyways, I want to reach out to those people and say, how you're having fun with all this stuff? And it's just an amazing experience, and you get to share it with your friends. Well, like you said at the beginning of this show, it didn't exist before 1974. And it exists because of a couple of men, but one of them that we're focused on, who lived in Lake Geneva, who was the author of Dungeons & Dragons. He wrote the game in Lake Geneva. They don't recognize him there. But if you want to show your appreciation for the person who invented your favorite pastime, this is the game. This is why all that stuff exists. This is why there's red, blue, green dragons. This is mind flayers, displacer beasts. This is why there's owl bears and rust monsters. This is why all this exists. This is why there's dark elves, and they're cool, because Gary, that's why they exist. And so there's millions of people who love all this stuff. but I don't think that they know that Gary had anything to do with it. And I want to get those people to say, you know, it's kind of cool that we know where the guy who invented this game lives or lived and where he wrote it. You know, that'd be kind of cool to go there, to travel there. And then they're going to find out that there's going to be a game table there where they can play with the inventor of the game. And that's what we want, is we want to cast a really wide net and bring this new generation in and educate on who Gary is and what his legacy is and how important he was to the world.
Well, good. That's wonderful. And I love the way you present it, Paul. I really do. Do you think you're going to have an issue with, and what are you going to do with the number of hand painted miniatures that people are going to deliberately leave on the table? Let me ask you that.
We're thinking about having a secret aperture somewhere where people can deposit things small like that, specifically dice, that can basically be put into the memorial and fill the memorial with them.
Neat. Alan Canning.
We're only going to let certain people know.
Right. Alan Canning asks, what D&D projects are you working with now?
Well, I have two game companies that I operate. One is TLB Games, which has mostly historical materials. It's got some wicked cool old school posters of Rob Kuntz's original dungeons from back in the 70s. And remember, Rob Kuntz was Gary Gygax's DM. So Gary Gygax's DM, Rob Kuntz, just a second. I have the phone, Bill. Just a minute. I'm getting the phone now.
Okay.
All right. So Rob Kuntz was Gary Gygax's DM. So when Mordenkainen played, Mordenkainen is not a Greyhawk character. Mordenkainen is a World of Calibroon character. And he didn't adventure in Castle Greyhawk. Mordenkainen adventured in Castle El Raja K. And so all of those materials that Rob created for Gary to play in his home campaign, and then the levels that Rob created for the Greyhawk campaign, those are, you can look at the El Raja K archive, which is a DVD that has basically Rob's whole collection of handwritten adventures and hand-drawn maps and all of this stuff. And it has, I think it's over 1,000 different images on it. And so I think there's 7 or 8 levels of the castle. There's 7 or 8 levels of the castle right there. Now, only one of them has its keys. Yes. The rest are just maps, because Gary retained the whole castle when he died. It continued to reside with him. In any case, TLB Games looks at Rob's collection of adventures, maps, manuscripts, everything that he created for the campaign with Gary and for the Greyhawk campaign. It's an incredible insight into the history and basically the dawn of Dungeons and Dragons. And so that's available on, it's a DVD that you can plug into your computer, or a USB that you plug into your computer, and you can surf through it like going on an internet. There's one. That's a beautiful one.
Yes.
That's the Roger K archive. It comes with a mini adventure called The Sunken City, which the Sunken City was the D&D for Prizes game run at Gen Con 8 in 1975. And so you can play that adventure using that. Anyways, so there's some other historical stuff there, like Merlin the Magician is a book that Rob wrote about Don Kay. There's no books written about Don Kay. But Merlin the Magician is sort of Rob's intimate look at Don Kay's life and Rob's experience with Don Kay. And so that's an incredible book because nobody knows about Don Kay.
Mm-hmm.
And then, of course, Dave Arneson's True Genius, which is something that Rob wrote about Dave Arneson and the sort of intellectual leap that Dave made to go from war games to role-playing games with Blackmore. And then there's the wicked cool posters, which are Rob's dungeon levels, some of them for Greyhawk and some of them for his World of Calibre. Some of the coolest old school dungeon maps you'll ever see, and they make awesome posters for your game room. So,
and I have those, by the way, guys. I just have a dearth of wall space to put them up. But Paul donated, and you guys in the chat, let me know if you guys want to. I can't believe I haven't asked you guys this before, but if y'all want to deep dive on this, if y'all want me to really dig in on this and do a feature show on this bad boy right here, let me know in the comments, and we can absolutely make that happen.
Yeah, there's some incredible stuff on there, like Rob's retelling of his adventure through the City of the Gods with Gary playing in Dave Arneson's campaign, and then Dave Arneson's reflection on how the guys did while they were in the City of Gods in Blackmore. And that's just one of the things. There's just so much great stuff on there. I mean, thousands of images. I think it was an important historical effort to preserve those documents from that time, because I just don't think all those documents are hidden away, right?
Mm-hmm.
I mean, will we ever get to see the original castle? I don't know. I hope one day we will, but if we can't, what you're holding in your hand might be the last vestige of that dawn of D&D time.
I have a joke I'd like to share with you. This is quite accidental. At LGGC 2006, Rob's game table was behind mine. I was running, I don't remember what I was running, probably nothing great. But Rob got up to go outside and have a cigarette, and I saw him, like, he leaned over and said, "Excuse me," and I scooted forward, and I looked back and saw that he was gone. As a joke, I took my camera and did this. I didn't look behind me. I just took my camera and did this and held the shutter button down and snapped a few pictures and then brought it back. I didn't look at the preview window or anything and set it aside and looked over my shoulder and told his group, I said, $5 a peek.
That's funny.
I figured what I had gotten on disc, because it was one of those early digital cameras that actually shot picture to a micro DVD. I figured, I would have a bunch of garbage, just a bunch of bad images. Yeah, no, I actually got very clear pictures of Rob's maps and notes. So,
he lives in Corsica now, so you can't take photos of him.
I'm sorry, what?
He lives in Corsica now.
Yeah, so I may have something very valuable. I don't know. It's probably all properly on here, but
so that's my game company called TLB Games. That stands for Three Little Books Games.
I love it.
So TLB Games, and then I also have Legends of Role Playing, which every year at GaryCon I run the Legends of Role Playing tournament. Like I told Bill at the beginning of the show, you guys at the beginning of the show, I had 142 people sign up this year, which I think makes it the largest old school tournament in the world. Not sure, but I'm going to say it is. We'll see. If anybody comes on the show and challenges me, well, then we'll know. But it's certainly one of the largest events to happen at GaryCon for sure. And so that company, Legends of Role Playing, is publishing those tournament modules as they are played, and then I work on publishing them. I had a little bit of a hiccup in the publishing schedule, but I plan to release 4 this year in the next couple months. So those are the role-playing game projects I am working on.
Excellent. Now, I want to kind of piggyback on that question. to Alan Hammock, if you're watching this and I've completely botched this, I apologize. Swiss cheese memory, old person brain, call it what you will. But are you doing some Legend of Wargaming stuff with Al other than as a DM in your Legends game?
Yes. He runs the Battle for Bloomville, which is this really ridiculously elaborate layout of a Boot Hill Western town, complete with the K silver mines, Sutherland Sundries, the Rock and G Ranch, and everything from their original campaign. But what they do is Alan was the editor and writer for a lot of the, which edition is it, Bill? First, second, third edition of Boot Hill, the box set.
The box set would be second onward.
I believe it's the 1980 box set, but
then that's yeah.
So he was the editor and author of a big chunk of that. And so he runs this big Boot Hill gun battle, and he has several factions. Like he has, the townsfolk, the brothel, the mine workers, the Mr. G's cattle hands, and so and then he pits all of these people against each other, and they have to decide whether to ally with each other or fight each other. And that was the game that Vince Vaughn got into. And I believe at one point there's a bit of fantasy which gets mixed into it as well. But it's a really wild game. And that is one of Alan loves to run that game. And every year he kind of puts a new twist on the scenario. But that's called Battle for Bloomville, of course, named after Brian Bloom, but also named after Gary and Don Kay and Dave Sutherland and a lot of people who have passed but have history with Boot Hill.
Excellent. That's good to know. Alan comes on the show a lot, and he's a great guy, and I love talking to him about TSR history. And he's a Crimson Tide fan, Roll Damn Tide. So we always eke out like 30 seconds and make the audience suffer through he and I talking college football. So,
well, I'm a Husker fan, so I don't talk about football anymore.
I understand, sir. I understand.
Once, Bill, we were the greatest program in the country.
Our prayers are with.
And then we fired our coach because we only went 10-2 2 seasons in a row, and we said that's not good enough. Fired. And then we broke every record, breaking all of our records from there on out.
Y'all didn't trust the process. Y'all should have trusted the process. So we have another question in the queue. Let me see. Now, I think I know the answer to this, but Paul's probably going to let the air out of my balloon here. Metatron asks, do we have a more precise moment than just 1974 D&D was born? Could be fun to celebrate D&D's birthday if we knew what it was. I think it was January 23rd. I think it matches up with my birthday in 1974 when I turned 4. D&D was. Paul, you want to chime in there?
Yes. It was actually, I believe, the first week of February. Gary wrote a postcard to Dave Arneson and said, the books should be ready and you should have your books next week.
Okay, so second week of February.
Something like February 11th, 12th, 13th, 14th. Somewhere in there is where he sent Dave's, because he sent Dave as soon as he had a full set, he sent them to Dave Arneson. And so that postcard, which I think is February 7th, 1974, is, he says next week I'll mail you yours, so that's what I say. And I also learned when they played Blackmore for the first time.
Okay. When was that?
Well, there's a postcard from Gary to Dave Arneson saying, I'll see you on or around the 19th of February, 1973. Not 1972. Not November 1972, which everybody says. But he says, I'll see you on the 19th. And when asked in certain court documents, when asked, Gary said, well, that was the only time they came down. So that has to be the time that he showed me Blackmore.
Oh, there you go.
Guess what? And so the story is the story, if you look at it, is that I believe that day is Columbus Day. I think it's Columbus Day.
So. Yeah.
Yeah. So whatever the case, it was a day off, and it was a Monday. So they were driven by a person, which I think my memory is failing me right now. I think was Pete Gaylord. I think it was Pete Gaylord, but whoever drove them down had a job at the post office, and he could only drive them down that day because he had work the next day. And so that matches up, because if it's a federal holiday, the post worker won't be there, and that's why he could drive them down. So February 19th is the day they played Blackmore of 1973, because it's always thought to be November.
So, folks, Paul doesn't just know when the baby was born. Paul knows when the baby was conceived. And that's all we're going to, that's as far as that analogy goes. So I hope that answers your question.
Let's just leave that one aside.
Yeah, we're just going to leave that one aside. So I think if I'm reading my audience's responses right, you guys, audience, if you guys do want to deep dive on this, you can hit me up, comments below or in the chat. Of course, I keep an eye on that. So
one of the guys mentioned that, but we need a USB version. There is a USB version of that. Yeah,
there is.
Did I give you a USB or did I give you a DVD?
You gave me both.
Oh, aren't I nice? Well, that was smart of me. See, there's the USB.
32 gig flash drive here, and I have this DVD-ROM chock full of fun. And I have posters and books and everything else in a box up on yonder shelf. So I got the full bug. What did you guys get? But no, that is what I will do if the group the chat there feels like they want that, then the chat will get there.
Yeah. I think somebody says it's Memorial Day. Is it Memorial Day or is it, I don't know, whatever February 19th is.
February, that is it. That's like Washington's birthday, actually.
Oh, maybe it's President's Day. Yeah.
I don't know. President's Day, something like that.
Is it rude to Google while you're on a live stream?
No, because I do it constantly to stay ahead of my audience. They'll ask me stuff a lot, and I'll be like, that's a good question. You bring up a good point. Well, the answer is obviously Minneapolis.
Bill has a special video that's him on loop going like this. And then you just, while you're Googling and off screen, you're just going like this. So like you're in thought, you come back and you're like, oh yeah, I remember, it's this.
The Robin Leach nod.
Nice. All right, what else? Are there any hard questions?
Any hard questions? Let's see. John Walker says, so do you game at a store?
I do not. I have had the same campaign going since 1993, sitting right in this spot. And
not all of them, though. You have separate chairs, I'm assuming.
Yes, it's true. And so I have 2 players from the original campaign that are still playing in it. And I think we have 8 players right now. We have 8 players in the group. And it's face-to-face, order pizza, drink soda, talk about our families, our jobs, and fart around and make jokes. And then about 10% of the time, we actually play D&D. And
there
I have
you go.
my nephews. nephews who play. So it's a great time.
Wonderful. If you've watched the show before,
wait
and
a
I know,
second. That's my 30th.
I,
We're coming up on our 30th anniversary this October.
good
So
Lord,
30 years.
You better do something special, like game for 11% of the evening or something like that. That's a 30
Maybe.
Game years, John,
30
to answer
game
your phone.
years
Maybe.
Their third level.
Their third level. Paul doesn't screw around. He's a true, AD&D DM. It's a no fun zone. I had someone not tell me directly, but someone made a post a long time ago, and it started turned into a meme that, like, why do people think RPGs are for having fun? I couldn't. I mean, how do you even address that? Let's see, but hard question from Kanik, or she thinks it's hard. We'll see. Do you have a favorite Gary or TSR memory?
Oh, yes, definitely. My favorite Gary memory was when I was playing in his original castle at Gen Con in 1999. I was playing with my best friend, Martin, who would later die in a traffic accident. But Martin and I were playing in this huge game with like 13 people playing in Castle Greyhawk, and Gary was just killing people off left and right because he didn't want to have to run it for that many people. So he was winnowing the numbers pretty bad. Well, as we kind of took basically a smoke break or something like that. And his youngest son, his son with Gail, his Alexander Hugh Gygax. Alexander for the game Alexander, which was Gary's first published real professional game, and named Hugh after his grandfather. So Alexander Hugh, and then there's a Hamilton thrown in there, but I don't know what that's from. Anyways, Alexander Hugh Hamilton Gygax is his name. So Alex comes up, and he must be 13 or 14 years old, maybe even 15. But he comes up and he lays his head on Gary's shoulder so that he's behind Gary. He's behind Gary, and he comes up and he lays his head on Gary's shoulder so that he's looking at Gary. And then Gary lays his head back and turns and faces him. And so they're really close to each other, and they're sharing this really sort of intimate father-son relationship, this father-son moment. And Gary says, and I was the only one within earshot to hear it. Nobody else could hear this. Everybody else is talking about how much is 50 foot of rope, and how much does this longsword cost, and that sort of thing. And he says to Alex, Gary says to Alex, you really should try this game. It's a lot of fun. And Alex, with a binder under his arm full of Magic the Gathering cards, says, "No thanks, Pop. I'll be over at that other table playing Magic the Gathering."
Oof. Oof.
The designer of D&D can't get his own son to play D&D.
Oh,
anyways, it was just such a really sweet sort of moment that, his son Alex was probably the only one who said, "No, I don't want to play D&D with you." No one else could say that to Gary. It was like, "Oh, yeah, I guess so. You're the guy who wrote it, so sure, I'll play with you." So, my favorite TSR memory is that since I've handled a lot of collections, I have seen a couple of memos 2 or 3 times. Well, there's one memo in particular that I've seen from 5 different collections. When they were in the Claire Hotel, the eaves had a lot of holes and there was some rotten wood up there, and wasps had built nests up there. And there wasn't any air conditioning, so they had to leave the windows open. So you would walk down the hallway and there would be wasps buzzing away down the hallway looking for their next victim. And so Tom Mulvey writes this memo from the designers department saying, would the leadership at TSR please get the maintenance team to take care of the wasp problem? I am deadly allergic to bee stings, and I'm really afraid that if I get stung by one of these wasps, that I will die. And so he says, this has made it a very stressful work environment, and I would really like you to take care of this issue. And so I've seen that memo, the one that went to Gary, the one that went to Brian Bloom, the one that went to Zeb Cook, the one that went to Lawrence Chick, and the one that went to Dave Sutherland. I've seen this memo in all of their collections, and I just think it's hysterical that they're working as professional game designers for this company, yet they're under constant threat of wasps flying up and down the hallway, threatening to sting them.
Oh my gosh. My favorite Gary gaming story is it's from a few years later. It was actually at Milwaukee Game Fest, and I was playing a Magic user, and this is important to the story. I had my wizard hat. And my Magic user, I could basically rain death on targets, and that was about it. There were like 15 or 20 of us playing, and this was with the Troll Lords. And so Gary's going around the table, and he points at me, and he says, "You in the hat, what do you do?" And I'm right. I'm caught cold because I had interacted with Gary. Like, I had telephone interviewed him the year before. Thank God I still have that. Do what? But you in the hat. And I just look around and I'm like, what am I supposed to do? Lob a fireball at random, So I said, I endeavor to persevere. Gary kind of stares at me for a beat, looks down at it behind his DM screen, picks up a D6, or I don't know what dice he picked up, but I heard him roll it, and you succeed. And then he just kept going. So I succeeded in endeavoring to persevere. We do have an actual question for you here, though, and this is important. This is loomed on my mind as well as Kinect asking. Will you be at the Great Underground Online Gaming Convention, Paul? Will you be at the Guac?
I think I've been invited by somebody. So I am guessing I will be making an appearance because I usually do what my friends tell me to do.
So there you have it. Paul will be at the Guac.
You think I can run a chainmail game at it? Like we did with our live stream chainmail game that you and I ran?
Yeah, get a camera set up, and I bet you could get people just mobbing you. I would play it. I would. Let me know when you want to run your chainmail game. I'll the link. Let me see. That's not it. That's the link to Gygax Memorial Fund, and I think you know all about that. Let's see. The Great Underground Online Gaming Convention. The sign-up page on Warhorn is right there. I'll put the link on the screen. Warhorn events, the Great Underground, and I'll send you that link, Paul, so you don't have to try and commit that to memory.
I've already looked at I think you've already sent me the link once before. I've looked at it, so I'm excited.
Okay. Cool, excellent. Get your Guac merch. We have two mascots this year: the invisible horse and the Guacatrice.
Somebody wanted to know what that figure was up there. See it? See that?
In the blue green?
See it up there?
Yes, I see it now. Yes.
That is a Sylph, and it's from one of the monster cards, and that's painted by Jim Rosloff.
Oh, that's lovely.
I was going to sell it at one point when I was selling a bunch of art, and my daughter said, "No, Daddy, don't sell that one. That's our favorite." So I kept that one.
Oh, that's wonderful.
Yeah.
That is delightful. Let's see. Amerif Eddie asks, are there any thoughts you can share on the new Dungeons and Dragons movie?
I went to it. As a matter
Well,
of
there you
fact, I told my game group, I said, you know what the nerdiest thing we could do as a D&D group is we should all go to the D&D movie together. And that's exactly what we did. And the best part about that movie was, okay, let's come up with this ridiculously complex plan, and it will be perfect. It won't, nothing will go wrong. Absolutely. It'll be perfect. And then, of course, one thing goes wrong and the entire plan disintegrates. It's fantastic. My group all decided that was them totally. Every time they come up with a
Yes.
really elaborate plan, it fails spectacularly. And that question,
There you go.
where
You mean
that question where Edgin, Chris Pine's character, goes, "Why would they store it like that?"
I have not
face.
seen it.
Why would they store it like that? And I just thought to myself, beautiful. That's totally D&D. So yeah, I enjoyed it. I thought it was good. I mean, some people say it's slow in parts, and sure, but it's the best D&D movie that's ever come out, and it's the closest thing to realizing a popularization of the genre in movies, other than Lord of the Rings. But Lord of the Rings is just not the gonzo magic. I mean, think of all the things a magic user can do in a game, especially a high level one. When they did the reverse gravity in the tavern scene, I was like, fantastic. I bet nobody has ever cast a reverse gravity spell on film ever. It was fantastic. Everybody knew exactly what it was right away. Oh, reverse gravity. Great.
Now, I maintain, first of all, let me just say, Heidi messaged me, I guess, in between the week when we got back from Gary Con and before COVID hit me. But she messaged me and said she saw it and thought that it was the kind of D&D movie that her dad would have loved. She said, Gary would have loved this. This was like, the vision of D&D. I have maintained, and I still maintain, and I will go to my grave maintaining, that to make a D&D movie, you have to bookend it with people playing D&D. You have to say, this is people playing D&D. Like, you could have made...
Bill, I mean,
good.
A D&D movie is not a fantasy movie fighting dragons. A D&D movie is a group of friends sitting around a table and sharing their whole lives together and all this shared imaginative world together and having a time. I mean, I'm playing with guys who were 12 years old when we started, and now they have jobs. They're bankers. They're vice presidents. They're surgeons. They're whatever. And they've got family, kids. Some of them are on their second marriage. I mean, it has followed us through our whole lives, but it's been the constant is D&D. And it is a constant connection. It's the silver cord that connects us to our youth. How's that for an illusion?
Yeah. I mean, say what you want about the veracity the state of it, the veracity of it. I don't care. Chris, what's his name? The guy that put together the trailer for The Great Kingdom, which ain't never going to come out. The way he punches that thing up, hitting on all those points, man, that thing's got an emotional 1-2 wallop you cannot deny. And that's not to discuss that documentary or anything to do with that, but that's the kind of emotional wallop that I would love to see in a D&D movie, Yeah,
I put my heart and soul into that thing. And so when the lawsuit came up, that was really heartbreaking. I mean, I really put all my guts into that. I think that I emailed them several times a day, every day of the year for a whole year. I think I had over 1,000 emails to them in 1 year about, here I've got this picture, or I've got this story, or here's this letter, or all of that sort of stuff. So it was tragic. But I'll tell you, the person who cut that trailer is a guy named Adam Turner. And Adam
Okay.
Turner and I have done a podcast called When We Were Wizards. So if you want to hear the people who were there telling the story from their perspective, When We Were Wizards is it. I mean, you will get to hear Mary Jo Gygax. You will get to hear Rob Kuntz. You will get to hear Ernie and Elisa, and you'll be hearing them talk about all of the stuff that transpired. Elisa standing in line and being looked down upon by the local town people because they were on food stamps.
Mm-hmm.
Literally Mary Jo cutting out cardboard and putting them in Ernie's shoes because he had holes in his shoes. Literally, the cobbler's son has no shoes. They were living in poverty. I mean, I look at the poverty line and look how much they were making, less than $800. They were not living they were living below poverty. I mean, it was rough for them.
Dude,
and so
I know what
this story in When We Were Wizards covers their perspective of everything that happened. And it goes from the very beginning all the way through the mid to late 1980s. So,
did you guys use any of the Gygax audio that I had sent along? The Gary Gygax audio.
Yes, and here is one of the problems with it is because we didn't use Gary's actual voice, because we don't have a lot of Gary's voice that we can use in the film in When We Were Wizards. So we have an actor who sounds like Gary, and he reads Gary's letters. And it's really an amazing, moving experience, because these are personal letters that he wrote to his friends, and you listen to his tone of voice and what he's really thinking behind the scenes. One of the letters is just incredible. He actually runs into Dave Arneson at the deposition during the trial and describes what the meeting was like. But if you listen to When We Were Wizards, you get to hear an actor, admittedly, portraying Gary, but reading that letter, and man, it really hits you. At one point, I just kind of got misty-eyed because it was like listening to Gary. And you're really hearing his words from that time, and you're really transported. And then you get to hear Mary Jo talking about those days, and Jim Ward and Lawrence Schick. The Lawrence Schick interview was incredible. I mean, if it could have been filmed, it would have been incredible. But listening to When We Were Wizards podcast, I mean, if you really care about this stuff, it will move you like that Great Kingdom trailer moved you.
Excellent.
It moves me. I mean, I know this history backwards and forwards, but there were times where I just had to stop recording because I got so choked up about what was being said. Because, I felt like Gary and I were friends. I mean, sure. I wish I would have asked him personal things instead of about Mordenkainen and chainmail and how many spells do you get? How many times can you cast a darkness spell and chainmail for a wizard? Those are the questions I asked him. Not what was it like growing up in Lake Geneva, or, I heard you were in the Marine Corps. What happened? Why did you get washed out of the Marine Corps? I didn't get to ask him those questions, but I wish I would have. But this sort of When We Were Wizards podcast, it really has been allowing me to kind of go through and ask those questions and kind of hear somebody with sounding like Gary say it. It's not Gary, but they're Gary's words on the paper being read by an actor. So,
right. Well, that's great. Do you have a link we can share? You can type it to me in the green room, and I'll put it up on the screen.
All you have to do is type When We Were Wizards, put it in quotes. It's on Apple Music, Amazon. It's on any podcast platform out there. There's a bunch of them. If you go out to there's a YouTube trailer for it, which is a sizzle trailer. And if you look up When We Were Wizards in quotes, www, When We Were Wizards, if you look it up in quotes and then YouTube, you'll get the video that has all the links. But we have 3 episodes out. We just finished the 4th. We're working on the 5th, and we're cranking through them this summer. And we'll have them all done by the end of the summer. So
great. Let's see. I think just want to make sure.
Oh, and by the way, the Great Kingdom is going to be finished.
Sure it is. I think it's awesome that you said that, Paul. I'm sorry.
Did you see the trailers at GaryCon?
No.
They had a 1-hour cut of the film that they showed at GaryCon. Did you know?
Wow. No, I didn't know that.
I've been working with them to finish it.
Paul, I literally almost left Orlando like being chased out of the city by my chat group. Okay. People ask you, did you do this at GaryCon? Did you do that at Gary? No. Like people throwing me onto the back of an airplane like I was leaving Khe-Sanh to go to southern Wisconsin. So I got to play 3 games and walk around and stare at stuff going, oh my God, they sent me to GaryCon. Although but did run.
When I tell you that the Great Kingdom is going to be finished, I mean it because I'm working on it.
Sure. And that's wonderful. No, I'm going to stop now. I'm sorry. Paul's going to sock me. He's going to fly down to Orlando and sock me.
You're going to eat a mountain of crow.
Well,
I'm going to watch you eat it on the next time I'm on the show.
But anyway, so just for my edification, you did or did not use the audio. I mean, I know you didn't use the audio, but did you use like the transcript of the audio that I sent you, or are you guys going to? That's literally just.
Since we're only on episode 3, we're only to early 1981, 82 in the story. And so we have gone through and we have transcribed it. So there's a transcription of it. But basically the show producer said that we might use the word and have our actor read it, but we decided to not use the actual audio because it's incongruous with the actor's voice. They sound different.
No, and that's fine. That's literally, I just I didn't want to step on anything you guys were doing, I guess is what I'm saying.
Well, when we listened to it, I mean, the one guy hadn't really heard Gary talk. One of our guys had never really heard Gary talk. And obviously you and I knew Gary personally. We've heard him talk. You interviewed him and heard him talk. I've talked to him on the phone. I've talked to him in person. And we've seen videos of him, but one of the guys had never heard Gary talk. So it was a real treat for him to hear Gary's voice.
Well, that's great. That is great. Why do you? Okay, sorry, computer was acting up. I feel like there was one more here. Okay, Alan Canning asks, and I think Paul, what's your schedule like? Because we're 2.25 hours into this. I don't want to keep you any longer than you had planned.
My wife just delivered some mac and cheese to me, so I can just eat this mac and cheese.
Okay, that's
fine. I'm gonna eat the mac and cheese right here.
Eat your mac and cheese, Paul, and we'll ask you the question, buddy. So another question for either of you, and I don't know the answer to this. Again, I was 11 when I bought my first D&D, so this one will probably slide over to Paul's side of the table. The game took off the university campuses originally. Future audience. Okay. Thoughts on the future audience of the hobby? That's a hard one because I got to be honest with you. And while Paul chews and swallows here, this will give me a chance to get up on a soapbox. I mean, where Wizards is going with Dungeons and Dragons, the name Dungeons and Dragons, and whatever they put under it, because they've knocked everything out from under it. Okay. This and this. They don't live at 1 Dungeons and Dragons Avenue anymore. They're gone. They were moved out. So I can honestly not say. I know what Wizard wants for a future audience of the hobby. They want Games Workshop-esque pay pigs. From what I have heard, the desired amount of time that Wizards wants anyone to spend on their D&D campaign is 6 hours. Whether that's 3 2-hour sessions, 2 3-hour sessions, 1 6-hour session, that is their stated goal. Like 6 hours, and then you move on to, you play a different character, you download a different splat book, you buy a different thing, somebody else DMs, that sort of thing. Paul's got a group that's been going for 30 years. I was looking at Roll20, which I kind of use as my watermark for when I started my Monday night group. It's been going for a decade. All right. Alan Grohe, his family and friends group has been going probably, I guess, for somewhere in between that. And Paul and I both know people who've been running games for decades and decades. We're atavisms as far as Wizards of the Coast is concerned. The future of the hobby that they want, and this is a future I'm fighting against, is a pay pig oriented, you play for a few hours and then you just forget about it after you've done premium upgrades on their little video game that's masquerading as a virtual tabletop, and so on and etc. And that's my dismal, dark look. Paul, do you have anything to add?
I think the reason why D&D took off on campuses is because a college campus is a collection of people from different parts of the country, and they all end up in one place together. And so one of my theories is the reason why D&D and the whole market crashed in 1983 or so is because a lot of people started playing D&D in 78 and 79 with the James Dallas Egbert explosion of information, right? Mm-hmm. These people played 4 years of high school or 4 years of college. And as soon as you're done with high school, boom, the group is broken. Everybody goes to college. As soon as you're done with college, boom, it's broken. Everybody goes back home, gets a job, right? Mm-hmm. And so I think that we're looking at the disintegration of the original groups that formed in 78, 79. And then just 4 years later, they disintegrated because they were either out of college or they're out of high school or whatever. And so I think that it was a pretty powerful force to have people come from their grade schools to high school or high school to college and bring D&D games to them and then play D&D games. But I think the internet is an even more powerful way to share those games. It might not be the way that we want them to be shared, but nonetheless, they're still sharing the concept. I mean, D&D and Displacer Beasts and Gelatinous Cubes and Barbarians and Paladins and Rangers, that's the lingua franca of role-playing games in the world right now. You know, if you ask somebody in 1978, what is a Paladin, they would not know. If you ask somebody now in their 20s or 30s, what's a Paladin, you might actually get an answer that they know what it is, right? Doesn't have something to do with D&D, might be the worst answer you get. But my point is that like there was that sharing on university campuses, I think that this is like a tenfold version of that. That this communication of this lingua franca of D&D is out there. Now, will they play the game du jour, or will they discover, you know what? We don't need any books, or we don't need any more books, or we can make our own adventures. I think that a large portion of people will eventually break away from that model and go back to pen and paper, because the real treasure of this game is sitting around face to face with each other. That's our generation. This generation operates on TikTok and Facebook and Instagram and whatever, right? Mm-hmm. And so they feel like that face-to-face experience that we had as kids, they're having much more access to that face-to-face experience the way that they expect it to be, which is through their phones, right? And so, I don't know, it's going to create a generation of people who just know what D&D is. And so if you know what D&D is and you walk into a friend's house and you see their D&D book on their shelf, and because you've played it online, even if it's one of these limited versions that's made for pay, you're going to say, oh, I play D&D. Well, we play on Wednesday nights. So I think ultimately it will have a positive effect on creating this lingua franca of D&D, that you won't be hiding your D&D books at your apartment because you don't want your boss to find out you play D&D.
Right.
You'll have a poster up, that shows a D&D post. And so I think it's just going to create a wider acceptance, and it's going to come out of the quote unquote basement and be even more mainstream. I think it could be a good thing. Yeah, I'm so optimistic, Bill.
Yeah, you are optimistic, and I would I would add a little bit to your assessment about the 83 collapse, if you will. I think I think a lot of it was socioeconomic, and folks who are a decade younger than me, 2 decades younger than me. I know some of you out there are like that. Paul, you and I are about the same age, so we have formative memories. The 1970s were not a good economic time. I mean, you pointed out the Gygax is standing waiting for food stamps. My father made $150 a week doing a job in a steel mill in Gadsden, Alabama, that was so filthy and unsafe, the unions didn't want it. They would let non-union people do the job. So $600 a month my dad made, and then he hung drywall on weekends to try and help us make ends meet. People needed a distraction. And other than the radio, 3 television channels, and the newspaper and magazines, that was it. I think that D&D came along at just the right time to balm people's psyches a little bit. Granted, a more literate crowd who were up to here with Watergate, Vietnam, a collapsing economy, rising stagflation, just a general sense of enemy that had settled across people. And then by the 80s, things were starting to look better. Now, again, I'm not and will not and am not going to have a political discussion, but if I can borrow a phrase, morning in America, things are a little bit more optimistic now. All right. Maybe we don't get nuked out of existence. Maybe gas doesn't end up costing $4. Hey, maybe gas doesn't end up costing.
I forgot that I was here and turned off the lights.
Okay. Maybe gas doesn't end up costing $4 a gallon, and meat, $2 a pound, and eggs more than 50 cents a dozen, and that sort of thing. And I think maybe as things started to get a little bit better, in addition to what you're saying, not rather than what you're saying, but in addition to what you're saying, people kind of started to get a little bit of okay, well, let's look at it's safe to look at what's in front of us now. We don't have to mire ourselves in fantasy and wall things off and hope that the world goes away while we're in the garage, the basement, the attic, the library, the dorm room. I think perhaps that fed into it a little bit also, probably less than what you're saying.
Well, tell me, my question for you: how did you get your first D&D set?
I went to a toy store in, I guess, the spring of '81 because I had hectored my parents about it to no end, and I bought a copy of B2 and a set of dice and a box of Grenadier miniatures. Note: there's no rule book listed in that.
Yeah, and so mine was my brother Don. My brother Donnie had a birthday, and his best friend bought him a Moldvay basic set, and that was his birthday present. And my brother Don opened it up and looked at it and said, "Here, Paul, this looks complicated. You read it and tell us how to play it." And that's how I became a DM. Boom, right there. So everybody went outside and ran around. Everybody went outside and ran around for about an hour and a half. And I read through the book and I read through the module a little bit. And then I walked outside and I said, "Okay, we're ready to play." But I remember, delivering newspapers, saving up $15 to buy the Dungeon Master's Guide. And then it would take us another month to save up another $12 to buy the Monster Manual or the Player's Handbook or whatever. And so we bought them at about a rate of 1 per month is how much money we could save from our paper route. So, and we were just, 14-year-old kids. So we were actually, kind of able to buy them on our own. And you bought your stuff on your own. You just bought the wrong things.
No, I would argue
arguably B2 was the right thing to buy.
Yes. I mean, of all the modules I could have picked up to say, well, surely this has everything in it, I got the one that damn near does have everything in it.
Yeah. Well, guess what? The only module available at Youngtown, where we shopped for our D&D stuff, guess what the only module they had was?
What's that?
Tomb of Horrors, baby.
Tomb of Horrors.
So our characters went from B2, Keep on the Borderlands, to the Tomb of Horrors. We had 14 kids in our neighborhood all playing this game, and everybody was dead by the end of the night.
I don't think if
and
you...
we were like, wow, that was a really tough dungeon.
I don't think if you soloed Keep on the Borderlands, you could get enough XP to successfully survive even the passive encounters in Tomb of Horrors. Like, okay, I'm not going to touch anything. I'm just going to carefully get, like, you open that disguise door and there's the 4-armed 10 hit dice, 60 hit point gargoyle that will peel you and eat you like shrimp. But yeah. So any questions? Anyone else out there in TV land? This is this guy has forgotten more Dungeons and Dragons than I have ever known. So don't miss your chance to ask the professor. He'll be back someday, but I wouldn't sleep on it, guys.
Once somebody asked me if I knew who some TSR employee was. For some reason, it rang a bell, but I just was having problems remembering who it was. So I went out, cheated a little bit, and I Googled this guy's name. And then I went out and looked it up, and I read this fantastic article that told this guy's whole history. And I was like, how does this person know this stuff? I thought I knew a lot about the history of TSR, but how does this person know so much about this guy? And I got to the very end, and it said, by Paul Stormberg. I was like, oh, yeah. I wrote this 4 years ago, and I had completely forgotten about it.
See, what I tell you guys, he's forgotten more than I know. Although you have mentioned this person's name before, and I this is probably something we should do, like just in a private conversation, but I'm going to ask you anyway. Who is the person at TSR who had the unenviable task of going through the crap that people would send them saying, hey, read my module idea?
Kevin Hendricks was one of the readers.
Okay.
And he had some fantastic letters. One of the letters were, hey, my brother Johnny and I found a lump of lead in the alley. If we mail the lump of lead to you, will you cast us the figures that, I mean, these are the literal sorts of letters they were getting from 10 and 11-year-old kids. These enterprising young kids who wanted to have miniatures for their game, but they knew they couldn't afford them. So they worked out this scheme where they found a lump of lead in an alley and thought if they could mail it to TSR could give them a discount because they had provided their own lead.
What was his response?
Oh, I don't know. I just, there was a received stamp on there.
Okay.
But I'm guessing some kid has a treasured response from Kevin Hendricks at TSR.
I never got a response from my module I submitted, and I even sent them a SAISY. I was a little disappointed about that.
Oh yeah, I got a couple rejection letters from them.
You ought to put me in touch with Kevin and see if he's got my module. I want that back. If he's still got that in a box, I want it back.
Oh, one of them was great. It was written by like a 9 or a 10-year-old, and he said, "Your game is really complicated, and I think you should have a game for young kids like me." He says, "So I've come up with a simple version of your game." And he says, first you go down the hallway and roll a 6-sided die. And if you roll a 3, you run into if you roll a 3 or higher or 3 or lower, you run into a monster. And then whatever you roll on the dice, you have to roll a d6 and equal that number or beat it, and you defeat the monster. And that's it. That is the D&D for kids system right there. You run into a monster, they roll a d6. If they roll a 5, you got to roll a 5 or a 6 to beat that monster, or you lose.
So it's like a streamlined dungeon. I appreciate the Kids Monksy. Dungeon's a great board game.
Yeah. So there's just like there was a zebracorn, which was one of the things, which is a zebra unicorn. I think it had somewhere around 1,000 hit points. And it had also, I mean, it literally had a 105 millimeter horn on the front, you know, for launching fireballs or shells. It was just great. I mean, that I think it could fire one horn every round, like a sidewinder missile. And I just have this fantastic collection of these. So
yes, well, I'm gonna have to reach out to him and see if he's got my module, because damn it, I sent them a SAISY. I should have gotten it back if they didn't want it.
No, he did not get it. I did not see it in those records. So sorry.
Oh, shoot. Okay, so here's a serious question. How involved was Gary in the toy line from LJN?
Not very much. By that time, he was moving out to Hollywood. I would say that he was involved in it in that he hired Duke Seafried to take over the toys division at TSR. And Luke and Gary put total faith in Duke Seafried because Duke had come from Heritage Miniatures. He had started his own miniatures company. He did Kriegspielers. I mean, Luke, or I keep saying Luke, Duke was definitely an industry, and he was the, you know, he's the proverbial sell an icebox to an Eskimo sort of salesman. I mean, he really could sell anything. And so I think Gary brought him in and said, just let Duke run with it. And so, yeah. So I would say that was about the extent of Gary's involvement in that. Although one of the first licensed TSR products that was heading that way was the AD&D coloring album. And that's the one with the...
It's quite a lovely book.
Greg Irons artwork, and, you know, the adventurers face... this kid's coloring book, the adventurers faced a beholder and the Demogorgon and Orcus.
That thing's a high level module. That is not.
And characters are dying. It kills characters get killed during the course of the thing. And I'm like, going, what kind of a coloring book is this? Half of the characters got killed before they got to the end of the coloring book.
I always thought the D&D beach towel was a pretty brutal dungeon myself.
Oh yeah, that one's a great one. So
was it Etten, Ramoraz, a green dragon, a beholder, and then like a goblin?
I asked Dave Sutherland about that, and he said, "Oh, I just put some monsters in there that were cool." That was the extent of the design, because Dave Sutherland did the artwork for those. I think there's one that has like a lich or a warrior riding on the back of a purple worm. with a sword up in the air. I'm like,
I
holy cow!
I have not seen that one.
The Maud Diab of D&D.
Love it. Let's see. Any more questions, guys? Any more questions? Paul, do you have any more stories while people are typing questions or sitting there silently enjoying this?
Well, you know this question probably, but I'll ask. So, in front of OD&D, under recommended equipment, it says 20 pairs of 6-sided dice.
Yes.
That's a lot of dice. I mean, we're talking about a dice problem. But why does Gary recommend 20 pairs of 6-sided dice, along with D20s and D12s? You know, he's saying one D20 and one D12 and one D8, 20 pairs of D6s. I didn't learn what it meant until I actually played with Gary.
What is the answer?
The answer is that all of the monsters in OD&D use a 6-sided die for their hit points. So every 1 hit point monster, Gary could grab 8 dice and say there are 8 orcs, and then he would dump them on the table. And there's their hit points right there. He didn't have to subtract or keep track of hit points or anything. He had them out there as dice.
Excellent.
And so if you ran into a larger creature, he could just use 2 dice. And as you wounded them, he would turn the dice down and mark down the pips by rotating the dice until you killed it, and then it would be removed from the table. No pencils, no record keeping, just like chainmail. You don't do any record keeping. The other thing, which was brilliant by Gary, is when I was mapping, I was drawing a map for this castle adventure we were on, and he said there's a hallway that goes about 60 feet, and there's 3 exits off of it. And then he proceeded to lay the dice down as 10-foot squares, and then put the various trunks that went off of the hallway with other dice. And he instantly showed me the configuration of the hallway without having to explain it at all. He just arranged it on the table right next to me, and then I copied it onto the graph paper.
Nice.
Neat.
Nice. That is exceptionally well done.
And it's never explained in the D&D book why you need 40 pairs of dice. I had to see Gary actually running the game to realize what that meant. That's a good story. I like that story.
That's a darn good story. I can answer this question from Alan. He was wondering about the notes left by Gary. Any news on them? Paul has them. There you go. Paul has them. Next question, please. But yeah,
I will say that Gary's wife Gail has them and has tried to develop them into products. She ran afoul of a lawsuit that pretty much put a lot of those projects on their ear. So you know, what is it? The curse, right? You know, everybody says it's the Gygax curse. Gary couldn't produce a game without getting sued to within an inch of his life. Sadly, you know, the company that he started with the game that he started, lawsuits, loss of the game company. So it's just more of the same. The notes are there. Now, I can tell you that there are 98 levels, 98 unique levels of Castle Greyhawk, or the original Castle, I should say, because Castle Greyhawk, Gary's version, has not been published. So Gary's original playtest Castle, there are 98 levels of that thing. 98! Now, that includes levels from the first Castle, which is the playtest version, where there was a 13-level castle, and there was 4 or 5 branch levels off of that. So that's 18, 19, 20 levels, something like that. But then the The second castle that he co-authored with Rob Kuntz, of which Rob created about 40% of the content of that castle, and Gary created about 60% of the content of the castle. There's the remaining up to 100. So let's say 80 some unique levels. So in total, combining everything, there are 98 unique levels, I believe. And they're all still exist. All of them. And they're not in my house. So don't come here.
Okay.
They're in a safety deposit box in a nuclear bunker under Crystal Mountain in Colorado.
There you go. I mean, you're in Nebraska. There's all those. There's all.
I don't live in Nebraska anymore. I moved to the moon.
Oh, you moved to the moon. Okay. Well, anyway, I'll leave it be at that. But one thing I will mention though is I know what's on the bottommost level of one of those of one of those. Of one of them. I know what's on the bottommost level of one of them because I've had the notes in my hand, not the actual note scans. I have, and if you guys have bought a copy of The Lost Crypt, you have seen a tiny, tiny infinitesimal piece that I contributed to. You can feel free to go buy a copy from Frog God Games, or I guess they sell it through that's on the tip of my brain. But anyway, you can find it at Frog God Games, but I don't make a dime for it. But it's a darn good module that I wrote for Gary. So go get it. Module. Thank you very much. Have you run it for a group?
I have not run it for a group. I almost ran it. I was pitching a game to a certain large computer game company, Gearbox. I was pitching this concept of making a computer game based on some property in Gary's collection. And at the center of Gearbox, this $1 billion company, that's how much they sold themselves for just a couple months ago. $1 billion, like $1.3 billion. That's a lot of money. Well, when I went down there, they were really excited because the design staff all wanted me to run something from the castle. And so I was like, okay. And so in the late 80s, Gary actually completely wrote and designed, fully fleshed out for publication, one of the levels of his castle, the Magic Pool level, which is the one that claimed poor Iraq's life. Ernie's character, Iraq. And so we were getting a tour of Gearbox, and they were like, you can't look in this room because we're developing stuff in there, and you can't go in here. You can't. And then we get to the very center, the heart of this multi-million-dollar building. I mean, it must have been a $5-10 million building. It was an amazing building built just for Gearbox. We get to the very center, and there's this huge set of double doors, kind of like a dungeon adventure. And we open up the doors, and at the very heart of this computer game company is a giant D&D room with a giant table in the middle to play D&D. And the walls are completely covered with thousands of miniatures to be used on the game table.
Wow.
And so I went to sit down to run this game, and the CEO was sitting right next to me playing Mello the Halfling. and all the creative designers, the CFO, the COO, and all these designers, they said, you know, we had to start turning people away because everybody in the company wanted to play in the game.
Wow.
And the game went on for 3 or 4 hours, and they got themselves all killed down to the last man. I completely wiped out everybody.
Nice.
And yeah, so that was a great moment. But that level, the Magic Pools level, was done for New Infinities or Gary's company at the time. And he was going to publish it as a sort of teaser or taste of what his original castle, Gygax Castle is what I like to call it. But he wanted to publish Gygax Castle like that. And so he kind of put this one level out as a teaser, but was planning to publish the rest. But it's probably one of the few basically made for publication levels that never got published. Because, of course, New Infinities was sued into the Stone Age by TSR for creating D&D, Dangerous Dimensions.
Oh, what might have been. What might have been.
But what might be, Bill? What might be is what I'm interested in. What might be.
What might be. And, of course, you'll keep us informed, I hope, as to what's coming up. When you can talk about it. I know dealings like this tend to be very fragile, and you don't want to, you don't want to offer something that's not completely
fragile is the understatement of the year.
Yeah. I mean, well, if I launch off into another story, we'll be here for another 2 hours and 45 minutes, which might please our audience. But certainly I think you and I both probably need to get some shut-eye at some point this evening. But do you have any other big reveals for us now, Paul, or...
I think I've told you every great thing except for one.
Well,
what would you think about a massive fall fantasy festival in Gary's hometown, which had a Renaissance fair and D&D being played in Horticultural Hall and an exhibit of Gary's literary works at the library, and the entire town serving turkey legs and Gygax ale and dragon beers and all that sort of thing, and the entire town being involved with it?
Well, I think that sounds lovely. That sounds absolutely wonderful, and I think people will get a big, huge kick out of that.
Yeah, I think it'd be great. So I'm might be working on something like that.
Well, keep us posted, and hopefully the next time you're back, you can tell all these nice folks who can afford to travel to such things that they got something to do in the fall as well as the spring. People, I'm from Florida. It's not spring. That's not spring. A foot of snow is not spring. You've been lied to.
Oh, the flowers, the tulips are under there, Bill. You just have to dig a little bit to see the crocuses and the tulips. They're in there.
I promise. I have one more question for you because I couldn't get a straight answer out of any Wisconsinites. Maybe you can explain this to me. I get that, like, in February, like, you'll see, one house that's got like a string of Christmas light bulbs they haven't brought in, and it's on a timer and it still comes on, right? It's like one house in a neighborhood of like 500 houses. You're like, I get it, but dude, seriously, step outside your house and unplug it. There you go. There you go.
That's me. I'm that person.
Okay.
I had COVID, and then I had a cold right after COVID.
I get it.
And then taxes were due.
There were Christmas lights up all over the place in Lake Geneva when Colleen and I were up there back in March. It's March.
There's still snow. If there's snow, there's Christmas.
That was what I came up with, but I thought, no, on the face of it, that's too ridiculous. Just because there's snow. Okay, well, now I have the answer, and now I'll let you go and eat something more than just a bowl of macaroni. I'm sure that I did ask you, Kennick, but it was I don't know. I made the mistake of jokingly saying to Heidi Gygax, "I'll drink every beer you set in front of me." To a Wisconsin hostess, I said this, Paul.
Isn't that a lovely story? Gygax and Eric getting married after having met at GaryCon. It's just a lovely story. The convention in honor of her father, and she meets the love of her life, and she gets married to him. It's just lovely. I just really love that story. Very happy for Heidi and Eric. I think it's just beautiful.
I think it's a wonderful story too, and I'm glad they shared the module with us because it's great fun. I got mine today. I did a little unboxing video.
That's cool.
It's
Did you
fun.
do the unboxing video already?
I did the unboxing video already. It's on the YouTube channel. Folks,
Go to the YouTube channel.
yeah. I will share the YouTube link for folks who are interested real quick. If you haven't seen the Gaxland unboxing, the unboxing video. My video is nothing special, but what I got was pretty special. So there you go. If you folks want to check that out, not now. Wait till the show's over. It's going to end in a few minutes.
I may say something important.
Paul may say something important. It's like, well, Bill, I'll see you later. I'm releasing Castle Greyhawk 1 through 26 levels next week. Click. You know. But anyway, all kidding aside, Paul, thank you for coming on the show. I really, really do appreciate it, and I love hanging out with you. And one of these days, there'll be an actual con event. You and I can get to game together again.
Great Underground. What is it? The Great Underground original online gaming community.
Great Underground Online Gaming Convention. The Guap. So you at the virtual table we shall meet, and that's in just a few weeks. So I'm looking forward to seeing you at that. Yeah. So thank you everyone for your wonderful question. Thank you to Doomsword for the super, and I will mess up the name of the person who did this, so I will just say the person who sent the super sticker. Thank you very much for that, rather than give the wrong person's name. But tomorrow night we will be back with some more reading of Dark Tower from Judges Guild, and then we're going to play some classic Gamma World. You play a lot of Gamma World, Paul?
I have played some Gamma World, and there's some pretty funny stories. I love Gamma World because one of the key skills of the game master is to make ordinary household objects appear to be high-powered atomic weapons from the future.
Exactly so. Exactly so.
I had one character carry a parking meter around with him for 3 or 4 years of the campaign, thinking it was some sort of plasma cannon with the dials, and it needed to have energy coins, and it had a road. And I had described it in a way that he thought, this is a plasma cannon. And so he literally carried this parking meter around for 3 years of the campaign. And then I described that he saw one that appeared to have somehow melted or burned into the ground and was stuck upright in the ground. And then that's when they all realized, it's a parking meter. You've been carrying a parking meter for the last years. So that's the fun part of Gamma World for me, is that the DM chicanery.
Well, I engage in a fair bit of chicanery on Friday nights as we play Gamma World.
You got me with a bit of chicanery when we played together. So, but I won't reveal your little trick that you got me with, because I don't want to steal your best stuff.
Well, thank you. I appreciate that. And when next you're on the show, perhaps we can discuss. We'll talk around it so as not to quite reveal all the secrets of it. But thank you again, Paul, for being here. It's always wonderful to have you, my friend. And come back soon. And we'll talk some more. Thank you to the audience. You guys had. Looks like you guys had a great time out there, the chat. And again, I'll be back tomorrow. You guys take care of yourselves. Don't open the door for any Pinkertons. And until then, let me ask you all something very important. Have you seen my owl bear?
Have you seen my owl bear? Here's to all the weirdos everywhere, in the woods and in the air. Have you seen my owl bear? Should I shave off all my hair? Bobs are all around, some live in tunnels underground. Some are fat, some are rich, some are sleeping in a ditch. Can you ride a crooked horse without a saddle way off course? Naked as a toad, all the way to Smoky Joe's. Have you seen the little creep driving fast in his little green Jeep? He smells like fish and brandy, but his rotten teeth look dandy. Take me to the show, I don't care if fast or slow. From action flicks to dancing dicks, just take me to the